You wake before the bell, before the hen in the lane begins her thin questions, while the house still remembers night. The pallet sighs when you shift. Straw rustles in a small, friendly quarrel beneath the linen sheet. The wool blanket gives you its quiet itch and then lets you go. Your breath hangs in the air as a pale ghost that knows better than to linger. The room is the color of watered milk. A draft tests the cracks, cool and clean, smelling faintly of wood smoke and yesterday's stew. The hearth holds a low red memory under ash, a hush that waits for your patience. You listen to it a moment, the way one listens for a sleeping child to roll and settle. You put your feet to floorboards that answer with a soft, honest creak. The rushes whisper underfoot, dry and herb-sweet after last week's cutting. On the trestle table, a thin seam of dawn runs along the boards and turns the dust into a slow parade. In that seam sits the fact you expect. One chair left pointedly empty. You notice it without seeming to notice, as if the noticing might embarrass it. You stand and wake the fire. The poker noses aside ash until a bead of ember winks like a patient eye. A twist of straw, a splinter's edge, a breath you keep gentle so the flame does not feel bullied, and warmth begins its work. Orange writes itself onto your knuckles. You rinse your face at the bowl. The water explains morning in a single cold sentence. Cloth does its quiet duty and goes back to the peg. You turn to the table and the waiting line of seats that are almost company. You touch each in passing, because hands often know better than minds. The mended bench, smooth as patience. The three-legged stool that never complains when the floor waves like a field. And the chair, the proud one, not high as a lord's settle, and yet taller in temper than the rest. The chair is turned toward the door, as it should be, as it always is. You place a beaker before it, earthen and chipped. You pour watered wine to the halfway mark because moderation keeps peace with cupboards. 2 fingers rest on the rim. That is all the blessing this house requires before breakfast, and plenty for a guest made of air. You take up the loaf from under its cloth cap, rye and barley together, honest as dirt. A heel gives way beneath the knife and keeps its crumb close and moist. You set it on a small trencher before the empty seat. It looks foolish and correct at the same time. You do not say a name. The village keeps a seat for travelers who become stories, for saints who prefer to be hinted at, for the wind when it wants to be treated like kin. You keep it because everyone keeps it, and because keeping is easier than explaining why you stopped. An empty chair is a small pledge, and it costs little. Heat walks softly from the hearth and warms your knees as you sit again on the bench. You hold your palms above the first small flames. Around you, the room adjusts to use. Spoon against bowl, lid against jar, a hook's small chuckle. The chair keeps its silence. You could tuck it back under the table. Instead, you grant it elbow room, a hand's width from the board, a finger's turn toward the door. Arrivals should not have to look about for their place, even when arrivals are mostly a manner of speaking. Outside, the lane stretches and clears its throat. Pigeons argue over a sill with the tone of officials who will never be pleased. The mill race mutters to anyone willing to understand. You open the door and let the morning skim the floor with a cool hand, then close it gently to keep the warmth. The light brightens the grain on the table and shows a scatter of yesterday's flower-like stars that have chosen a safer sky. You set bowls where bowls belong and lay spoons in their home places. A pinch of salt waits in the little wooden box. You check the pegs that grip the trestles, because even furniture appreciates being asked how it's holding together. You count the seats without appearing to count, the way prayer becomes a rhythm rather than a plan. The empty chair completes the number like a rhyme you do not say aloud. You speak a breath toward it. Not a prayer, not a bargain, not even words. Just a small sound that would be steam if your mouth were a pot. It is enough. You fetch barley from the bin, run your fingers through it until the husk's quiet, and measure by habit rather than by measure. Water goes to the pot, barley follows, and a pinch of salt says yes to both. The iron begins to tick as it warms. Steam will come in time, and the room will know what hour it is without needing a bell. You sit once more. You look without staring. You practice that village art of attention that does not claim its object. The chair faces the door. The beaker gleams faintly. The heel of bread breathes its rye smell into the shallow morning. The house fills with the sort of company that never interrupts you and never leaves. You are not waiting. you are keeping. You listen to your breathing, to the ember's soft shift, to water starting to think about boiling. You smooth the cloth along the table's edge with the flat of your palm and feel the patient splinters admiring your caution. The light on the boards widens and shows the mark of old knife work, scars that have retired from argument. You nod once and let the day proceed at the speed of its own choosing. The morning is kind in its slowness. It offers you enough to do without haste and enough quiet to make even doing nothing seem industrious. You do not look for omens. You settle for warmth, for bread, for the exact angle of a chair that may never be sat on today. This is service and also rest. You are content to let the room finish waking while you pretend to help. You sit on the hearth bench because it remembers warmth better than any cushion. You hold your hands above the ash, palms open, and let the ember's breath rise to meet your skin. It is not much, and it is exactly what you ask for. The ash shifts when you breathe on it. A dull red wakes here and there like seeds deciding to sprout. You tease them together with a sliver of wood and a patience that would impress the beetle. Bits of last night's twig remember their job, and remember it slowly. Flame is not proud this early. It eats only what you feed it. You turn your fingers and warm the backs, then the knuckles, then the thin place where the thumb joins the palm. You do not hurry. Heat travels at its own pace. Your nails keep a rim of flour from yesterday. The warmth loosens it. You rub, and the flour goes to ash, and ash goes to air. Behind you, the trestle table stands ready. The beaker you poured keeps its modest glimmer. The heel of bread breathes rye into the room. The chair you turned toward the door remains turned. You glance at the unsat place, as if warmth might wander there and find it pleasant. You add a twist of kindling and listen. The sound of catching fire is almost language. A thin crackle, a small sigh. The pot answers with a soft ticking as iron thinks about duty. Barley and water begin their slow conversation. A little steam lifts the lid and lays a damp finger along the air. You sit a touch closer, because the bench is generous and the day is long. The hearthstones hold stories. There is the scorched corner where a spilled ladle taught you about balance. Your heels find their old place on the worn rung below the bench. You lean forward, elbows on knees, hands wide to the small red kingdom. Your breath slows to match its pulse. A draft sneaks under the door and lifts the rushes into thoughtful rustling. You let it pass, a guest on its way elsewhere. It noses at the beaker and at the empty seat without moving either. The chair does not shiver. You reach for the poker more out of ceremony than need, and draw a furrow through the ash to let the underglow see the air. A brighter thread appears, then another. You place a larger stick with the care of a nurse. The flame answers with the small confidence of something that has noticed it will live. Heat licks your wrists. You pretend not to notice. The pot goes from thinking to working. Water nudges barley into softening. You stir with a wooden spoon. The spoon advises patience. A pinch of salt follows. A sensible companion. You scrape the pot's bottom circle once for luck, and set the spoon on the clean plate kept for this chore. The bench congratulates you by being warm in precisely the right place. You let your gaze return to the unsat chair, not as a stare, more like a weather check. The beaker's rim holds a ring of light. The heel of bread steadies itself, as if refusing to slide toward anyone in particular. You say nothing. Silence behaves well when fed. Your hands hover over the embers again. Skin learns the shape of heat and pretends to be made new. If you restored nothing else today, this would be enough. The village expects plenty from everyone and everything, even from chairs that do nothing but sit correctly. A hen scolds the lane and then changes her mind. From the loft, a mouse rearranges its plans. You take a breath and set it down carefully, like a tool on a shelf. The room collects its noises into a tolerable murmur. You notice the smell the ash keeps from last night's stew. Onion, bone, a hint of sweetness. Today will favor barley, which is more honest. You approve of honest food, as steady as season and river, like the way one chair is kept slightly apart and angled to the door. Your feet find the warm place again. You flatten your palms and let the heat climb them like a careful cat. There is no hurry here, because haste has never improved breakfast. You think of the stone at the threshold, worn by feet larger and smaller than yours, and how few of them rushed when they could help it. The village gets through a day by letting each task serve as an excuse to rest. The flame, now sure of itself, lifts 2 fingers and waves. You nod back. You add a log the size of your forearm and place it slantwise to bridge the coals and the new heat. It catches slowly, then stands straight and sure. You dust your hands softly. Steam rises from the pot in a regular breath. You lift the lid, stir once, and watch the barley thicken. You could call to the others, but voices travel when they should, without being chased. You set out the bowls and the ladle, turn the cloth on the table so its hem sits even, and check that the beaker near the unsat chair remains halfway. It does. You return to the bench, because benches like to feel useful. Your fingers hover, and then descend into the warm air over the embers. The sensation is a wide yes. In that yes, the room arranges itself around you like a blanket, and covers the thin places first. The chair receives its share of this ordinary blessing, not because it needs it, but because it would be unkind to leave it out. You think the world feels properly portioned, enough for hunger, enough for patience, enough for a seat kept open, so hope does not have to stand. You hold your hands there a moment longer, palm steady, brow easy. When you draw them back, they keep the warmth for several breaths, as if unwilling to admit the visit is over. The ember bed glows in a slow conversation you do not need to join. The bench offers its small approval. The pot offers the promise of porridge that will not surprise anyone, which is exactly what you require. You rise with the rhythm of someone who is not busy and will nonetheless complete everything. You give the empty chair one last unimportant glance, a courtesy equal to any, and step toward the table where bowls expect to be filled. You count the stools because numbers like to be noticed before they consent to behave. 1, the low 3-legged friend with a chip along its rim. 2, the taller cousin with a new rush seat that smells faintly of river. 3, the bench that calls itself 2.5 when the floor tilts. 4, the chair that thinks in sentences, angled to the door as if practicing greetings. You let your finger drift along each seat, as if tallying with touch counts more than chalk. The pot speaks in small breaths behind you. Barley thickens with the sort of patience you admire in old stone. You stir once, twice, and watch the path close after the spoon. Steam grazes your cheek and leaves a damp kiss of salt. You keep the lid crooked so the pot can see the room and feel included. You set the bowls by habit and not by plan. The largest takes the place nearest the ladle. The cracked one claims the corner where it can pretend to be shy. You lay the spoons like little oars ready to row through porridge. The cloth beneath lies plain and honest, its edge squared to the table. Counting goes better when everything agrees where to stand. You return to the seats. 1 again, because certainty enjoys repetition. 2, 3, 4, which is also not 4. For the empty place remains its own kind of number. You slide that chair a finger's width further from the board, enough space for an arrival to breathe. The beaker waits before it, half full, attending to its duty of being present without insisting. The heel of bread keeps its shape, as if it has been coached. Your breath makes a thin ribbon in the cool. You bend your head toward the unsat place, and let a line of warmth escape your lips into the space between seat and air. Not a word, not even a letter. Just a breath that says what a nod would say. There you are. Welcome to the nothing you require. The chair receives this with the composure of good wood. At your feet, the rushes tell your steps to go softly. You go softly, not because you must, but because it pleases the floor when you do. You straighten the trestle pegs again, knowing they are already firm. Asking after things, even when they are fine, is its own politeness. Counting stools is one way of asking. From the loft comes the clumsy whisper of someone turning in quilts, then stillness. The lane outside finds a slower pace. The village keeps its own sums of bread, of chores, of seats spared, and duties assumed. It is comforting to be part of an arithmetic no one writes down. You visit the pot, lift the lid, and stir in a circle that pretends to be decisive. Barley gives way and then returns. You add a thumb of butter and watch it soften without triumph. A few shreds of onion go in, as if they were advising the barley on flavor. The spoon rests on its plate. You check the bench, pat its worn edge, and hear it agree to hold. You tip the 3-legged stool and settle it again to hear that agreeable thought. as foot meets floor. You lift the tall stool by its rush band and feel the cool weave against your fingers. You put each one back where it knows how to be. Order makes a music of small clicks and soft thumps. The empty chair needs nothing beyond what you already do. The angle to the door, the polite distance, the bread, the beaker, the clean trencher that may serve as a plate or a promise. You smooth a wrinkle from the cloth beside it into a straightness that would pass inspection by the strictest ant. You suspect even saints prefer an unsat chair that looks as if it has made an effort. You lean your hip against the table and count again, half under your breath because counting likes secrecy as much as certainty. 1, 2, 3, 4, not 4. Your finger taps the board in a small rhythm to seal the sum. This is all the ceremony required for a morning. The scent of barley turns rounder and kind. You ladle a spoonful back into the pot from a height, just to hear it say plop. You add a pinch more salt with the seriousness due to salt. You wipe the ladle's lip with a clean rag that holds the memory of last wash day. The pot resumes breathing, as if relieved to be trusted. You open the door a hand's width. Air moves across the room and touches the empty chair before it reaches you. That seems the correct order. You close the door gently and let the latch sit in the notch with the sense of a job completed. The bowls glow a little in the thin light. Others will drift in soon. The way leaves settle into a basket left precisely for that purpose. They will sit where they always sit, and you will remember to look at them without staring, to serve without ceremony, to let the empty seat remain a steady corner of the morning. Counting will continue even as spoons lift and bowls empty, because numbers like to remain. You take the beaker near the spare chair and tilt it until the surface just kisses the lip, then set it back unchanged. A mark of attention is different from a change. The bread's heel you nudge a finger nearer the trencher, just enough to show you have not forgotten. Your breath goes once more into the space between seat and air, a small draft that joins the room's gentle weather. When you finally sit, you choose the bench because benches are patient with people who do not like to choose. The warmth from the hearth reaches your knees. The spoon fits your hand as if it practiced all night. Steam follows the spoon and tries to be helpful. Across from you, the empty chair maintains its good posture. You look away to be polite, then back again. You have counted enough to loosen the spine of worry. The room holds steady. The porridge arrives at readiness without boasting. The chosen gap beside the table does its work simply by existing. You breathe in, you breathe out, and leave the air beside the unsat seat a little warmer than you found it, which is service of the quietest and best kind. You angle the quiet chair toward the door again, not because it forgot its lesson, but because attention has a way of settling into wood when you offer it daily. You plant your palm on the worn top rail and feel the shine that comes from years of sleeves sliding by. The grain rises in little rivers under your skin. The chair turns with a well-behaved scrape, a sound that says that is far enough, and also thank you. Its front legs face the threshold the way a courteous person faces a greeting. The door itself minds its duties with the same old temper. The iron latch has a chill even near the hearth's edge. You lift it and lower it twice, a quiet test of friendliness. Hinges answer with a small throat clearing that promises they will not surprise you later by speaking too loudly. The gap at the sill breathes a thin line of lane scent into the room. Damp wool, trampled straw, the faint stone, cold of well water, a whisper of hens gossiping about nothing that concerns you. You step back to look at the angle, as if judging a harvest furrow. A finger's breadth too much would make the chair stare outside like a nosy cousin. A finger's breadth too little would have it sulking at the table's edge. You correct it. A little toe nudge to settle the front right foot against the board's knot that you always use as the true mark. There. Any traveler, real or invented, will see their place without fuss, which is the point. Behind you, the porridge remembers to thicken. The spoon stands in the pot on its plate like a staff, set aside by a pilgrim who only meant to rest a moment. The steam goes on, delivering advice to the rafters. You nod to it, then return to the chair, as if to a child who has agreed to behave and yet benefits from seeing your eyes. You polish the beaker's rim with the edge of the cloth, a ceremonious nothing, and align it with the chair's front rung. The heel of bread, you move a thumb closer to its trencher, then pinch away a crumb and let it fall for order's sake. You look up at the lintel where a small scrap of rush hangs. forgotten by everyone including you until now. You leave it. Even forgetfulness has a place. At the threshold you test the view a guest would have. The lane runs left to mill, right to church, straight to hedges that keep their own counsel. The morning has rubbed its eyes and started on the long work of becoming day. You imagine boots sturdy, cracked, respectful of mud, pausing here and recognizing the quiet invitation of the chair turned toward them. That recognition is enough. No herald needed, no trumpet, only wood pointing in a kindly direction. You let the door rest, nearly closed. Draft, in its tireless practice, tucks itself around your ankles and investigates the room. It finds the unsat place first, which feels correct. A strand of rush at your feet flips, then settles. The floorboards, long cured of ambition, accept the breeze and carry it politely beneath the table. You approve of a house that knows how to host even a guest made purely of air. The chair's feet sit square on the floor. You set your hand to each joint and feel for the small complaint of looseness. Pegs remain firm. A summer's swelling and a winter's shrinking have agreed on a truce for the moment. The rush seat offers a faint river smell that even a cold morning cannot quite take away. You press with your palm and lift. The seat springs back with stubborn good health. If ever a ghost desired comfort, this would do. You speak to it without words again, because words would make too much of the matter. A breath, a tone that is not a tone, the gentlest downward nod of chin. That means you are seen. You do not name the kind of traveler you have in mind. Sometimes the village imagines saints, sometimes soldiers who have remembered to put their swords away, sometimes cousins returning with improbable stories that become more probable as they sit. You prefer to imagine wind with manners. At the table you square the cloth's edge to the board, as if angles everywhere benefit from agreement. The spoons lie in their small parade. You set your own bowl out of the chair's view, because even a wooden guest deserves the courtesy of not watching others anticipate the first bite. The empty trencher keeps its patient face. You admire patience. It travels well, carries nothing, and arrives on time. The latch clicks once more when you test it with your fingertip. You listen past the room to the parish path. Two crows quarrel and are satisfied by the quarrel itself. From the mill comes a tone that suggests the wheel would be happy to start turning whenever someone asks nicely. The day moves its pieces, and you move this one chair, and the village blushes with the decided calm that comes from simple things being put in the right place. Your hip learns, as always, the exact distance between trestle and chairback. Your thigh knows to pass cleanly without catching the rung. Habit becomes choreography. You walk around the chair once, a modest procession of one, testing sight lines as if staging a feast for shadows. From the hearth, the chair is properly frank to the flame. From the door, the chair is welcoming without appearing eager. From the bench, the chair is present without staring. Each vantage nods approval. You set the beaker so the half-filled line faces the door and holds a glimmer where morning light can find it. A thirsty traveler should be able to read thirst's answer from 5 paces away. You turn the beaker's chip toward the chair, a little secret between two sturdy things. Bread remains where bread should, brown and sincere. You lay the knife with its blunt side outward, because even a blade enjoys a chance to look harmless. You rub the rung with your thumb, not to smooth it further, but to share the day's first true warmth from your hand. Skin to wood is a language faster than speech. The chair will carry that touch longer than you think. Wood keeps such confidences and gives them back slow. A soft footstep upstairs drifts into stillness. You do not call. The room is already occupied by readiness, and everybody knows the way to the table by smell alone. You step aside from the chair the way one steps aside from a doorway to let light pass. The angle holds. The invitation stands. At the hearth you lift the lid and let steam fog your brow. You stir once, tasting with your eyes the small shine that means almost. The spoon rests again, and you let the lid settle as gently as if it were a sleeping cat. The bench draws you back for a breath, but you remain standing. Standing suits the business of arranging welcome. Outside the lane inhales a new gust and releases it. It carries straw chaff, a whisper of damp wool, the faint iron of the well. The door's seam gives you a sample, and the sample finds the chair. Your house now smells, in the smallest way, like arrival. You allow yourself a plain satisfaction at the correctness of this. You check once more the distance from chair front to board, the breadth of your palm and 2 fingers. Enough for knees, not enough for hesitation. You measure from habit, and because, in this village, care is the only luxury that costs nothing and buys everything. The chair, having been angled, requires nothing further. You stand with your hand on the top rail and let stillness do the rest. Eventually, you take your place on the bench and look across without looking hard. The chair faces the door. The door faces the world. The world will manage to send whatever it sends on the feet it has. Your part is not to fetch or to ask. Your part is to set a thing right and then leave it there, which is a skill old houses teach. You hold that lesson on your tongue like a crumb of salt and taste its sense. The moment passes into the next one, as moments do when they are not chased. The porridge thickens. The bench approves of your weight. The chair keeps its post as if it had invented the practice. You have angled it for travelers, for saints, for wind, for the quiet itself. You have done it so often the gesture belongs to the room more than to you. You breathe and share that breath with the space in front of the unsat seat, a last small courtesy before the day remembers it is hungry. You take the ladle the way you take a breath, not as a decision, but as the next sensible thing. Iron taps iron when you lift the lid, and a mild cloud rises to meet your face with barley and salt, and the last memory of onion. The broth has the good sense to be neither thin nor proud. It moves in the pot like a slow river that already knows the bend. You test with a half ladle returned to itself. The sound is a soft approval. You stir once from rim to center, then let the spoon rest and begin the small procession of bowls. Clay waits with the patience particular to clay. You pour the first, not quite full, because hands wake slowly and laps deserve mercy. Steam lifts and chooses the rafters for the long way home. You keep your voice at the level of the room, a greeting for whoever steps down the ladder stairs. A small word for the cat you do not see. The house files these notes away like folded cloth. You do not speak to the empty chair. You speak near it, which is a kind of conversation furniture understands better than people. Second bowl, third, fourth for the cousin whose appetite outruns his feet. You set them along the board in the chart everyone obeys. Bench side, tall stool, 3-legged, then a respectful interval where the unsat place keeps its little court. You pour a half ladle into the clean cup before that chair and let it cool, as if the air might sip and be grateful. Your voice slips softer as you pass there. Nothing in particular is said, which is exactly right. The ladle brings up a barley moon with flecks of onion like islands. You set a bowl for yourself and set it aside to practice waiting. The pot sighs once. You answer with the sort of hum people use on bread and babies and let it fade. A foot tests the ladder, then retreats to consider its courage. You fill a bowl with the cracked lip and turn the flaw toward safety. Steam settles around your wrists and reminds your skin that warmth is a task as well as a comfort. When you lean to place a bowl near the spare seat, your voice lowers again without consulting you. You say the kind of thing one says to broth to keep it generous there now, easy in the chair, being made of thoughtful wood. Hears. Wood listens better when spoken to softly. The chair rewards your belief by not creaking. Across the board, the heel of bread waits without boasting. The beaker holds its half measure with a thin ring where cool meets warm. You nudge it a finger nearer the cloth's edge, the silent offer that means help yourself whenever you become someone. Names of things are enough for mornings. Bowl, spoon, crumb, salt, hush. You line the spoons like little oars about to cross a friendly sea. Beyond them, the chair keeps its angle to the door, continuing its conversation with the threshold. You breathe with the pot's rhythm. Each exhale makes a small cloud that wanders toward the chair and dissolves there, as if the wood were quietly drinking weather. This pleases you more than it should. Pleasing is allowed in the morning. Someone coughs in the loft. You pour 2 more bowls and fold a cloth for a handle. Behind the steam curtain, the barley completes the hard part of softening. You add an herb pinch and change nothing else. You sit at last, not at the bench's proud center, but at the side with the best view of arrangements. Your own bowl waits for you to remember yourself. The spoon enters with the politeness of a guest and leaves with the satisfaction of a worker. The taste is exactly what it promised. Field and storehouse, stone and hand, patient and kind. When others drift to their places, breakfast arranges itself. A sleeve at the board, a chair adjusting, a creak that only means I exist. You lower your voice when the ladle crosses the empty interval. No one remarks. Shared quiet is a well-kept path. A spill happens and is forgiven. You dab it with the cloth and return it to its corner. The pot breathes gently. The chair's shadow falls into the gap, proof that even absence has a shape. Someone asks for the salt. You point with your chin. The box sits near the unsat place. Appetite finds its level. Warmth begins the necessary work behind your ribs. Between bowls, you carry the ladle past the chair and, from habit, let your tone fall to the grain. Words are unimportant. Their temperature matters. Go gently. Keep one seat untroubled. Let the work find its size. The chair repeats this to no one. You dab the beaker's ring with a hem. The bread is bread. Bowls empty politely. The table gathers crumbs like a small map. When you scrape the pot, your knee taps the chair's rung. It neither complains nor agrees. The last, thick portion answers with a slow yes. You carry it carefully past the place no one occupies, and set it down like a small, important animal in a nest. Breakfast finishes itself. Bowls stack with little chimes. Spoons clink once and rest. You leave the chair as you found it. Turn to the door, with bread and beaker, attended by quiet. Your voice returns to its ordinary register only after you step away. You put the lid on the pot and let the last steam become air. The rushes accept the few drops you did not spill. The house smells like hearth and barley and politeness. You wipe the board in long, even strokes and glance to be sure you have not jostled the honor due there. The posture holds. You allow yourself a private nod. Low voices have done their work. Bowls have done theirs. The chair performs by not performing. You set the ladle on its plate and let the morning turn toward whatever waits, leaving the space you kept to go on keeping itself. You hear it first at the well, because water keeps other people's words polished. Rope sighs, bucket lips kiss stone, and the woman ahead of you says without turning that the tanner kept a place last night, not for coin, not for kin, for air that might arrive with dust on it. Her voice folds the news into the small winter cloud of her breath. You nod to the back of her cap and lower your bucket, letting it learn the same rumor the stone already knows. The bell for prime reaches from the church and counts the morning in slow circles. Gossip walks faster. It slides round hedges, slips under wagons, and climbs fences with a cat's balance. You carry your water home and study how talk moves, along hands, across lids, beneath laughter. Everyone speaks of wind and weather. Everyone means chairs. By the bakehouse, heat breathes from the oven mouth, and loaves lie ranked like quiet soldiers waiting for crust. The baker, flour to his wrists like sleeves, mentions by not mentioning that he leaves one stool turned sidelong each evening. Keeps the room even, he says, dusting the air as if feeding it. You nod. A scholar of furniture, and file, sidelong stool, purpose undecided, sense certain. At the mill, the wheel ticks with wet patience. The miller's boy waves you into flour haze. We keep a seat by the sacks, he says, for whoever comes panting. He means people, you suppose, but his eyes stray to the door like a dog's. You leave a blessing with your glance and step into air you can chew a little less. The beadle at the church porch arranges his stern for later. He keeps a stool turned a finger toward the path. Pilgrims, he says, then adds more honest. Neighbors with more road than sense on them. He touches the seat with 2 fingers, the way one blesses a child too proud to admit it needs blessing. You pretend not to see and thereby see better. Reasons do not interest you. Patterns do. A seat saved, a place made, a hush appointed to keep watch. The bell for prime completes its round. Terse waits its chance. Feet increase in the lane, but speech now travels alone, quick as a leaf in a ditch after rain. At the market cross, the herb wife lifts bundles that smell like boiled patience. Each night she lays a sprig on a chair, not to claim it, but to remind herself to leave it unclaimed. Mint on Mondays, she says, then whatever answers. You imagine leaf language, a dialect benches understand. You pay an agreement and pass on. By the stream where dye rinse runs thin as tea, the widow tells you she sets her 3-legged stool by the hearth each night and ties a blue thread around one leg, not binding it, just reminding it to stay free. He liked blue, she says, not naming the he, which lets memory sit without forcing anyone to stare. You set the picture down in your mind the way she sets the thread. Light, careful, necessary. You think of your own chair turned toward the door, the beaker at its post, the heel of bread breathing rye, the knife laid with its harmless edge outward. You think of last winter's wind that sat there for 3 weeks and left the rushes thoroughly satisfied. The village has been keeping company with empty seats longer than memory cares to confess. Bells tell the hours. Chairs tell the temper of those hours. The reeve passes with a ledger tucked like a small disapproving house under his arm. He keeps a space at the tithe table, he says, in case a late hen or a bashful measure of oats arrives and needs a soft landing. He calls it prudence, because reeves collect such words. You call it kindness, because you can. At the mason's yard, a half-built wall stretches like a yawn. A clean slab lies beside the tools, swept daily, never sat on. For luck, the mason says, touching his cap to stone. Luck prefers tidy surfaces, he explains, though luck and cleanliness are not often seen at market together. You accept this as you accept weather. Noted, endured, not argued. By the far field, a boy keeps sheep with a stick the color of old thinking. He shouts less than he intends, which is an achievement. When he rests, he lays his crook across a low wall and leaves a space beside it, as if expecting a guest shorter than a lamb. Stones, you note, can host as well as wood. By the time you return, the air has that listening look that means terse will speak soon. Gossip, having finished long ago, washes its hands and pretends it never worked here. You walk with a lighter bucket than you carried out and take your wages in quiet. The lane smells of damp wool and crushed mint. The church front holds a little sun the color of butter that forgot how to boast. At home, you pour water into the jar and touch the table's edge to greet the boards. The beaker still holds its half. The bread looks patient. The chair keeps the door within its attention. You angle it the width of a thumb more welcoming, because welcome is like salt, measured every time as if never measured before. You wash the dust of other people's furniture from your fingers. Water speaks its single sentence and settles. The drying cloth remembers both beaker and hands and judges neither. You sit long enough to give the bench its share of you, then rise not to be busy, but to be exact. You are one mouth in a village-sized whisper that moves from door to door, laying a place for whatever travels lightest. You push the beaker a finger nearer the chair. You straighten the trencher. You let your voice drop, not to speak, but to let silence feel seen. You nod, once scholar of chairs with more sense than saints, and write nothing down. The inventory lives where it should, in the angle of wood, in the half cup, in the warm breath you set gently into the space between seat and air. Bells may tell you when to kneel. Chairs teach you how. You choose the heel because it knows how to behave. The loaf sleeps under its cloth like a small, warm hill, and when you fold back the corner, air escapes with the smell of field and oven. The knife for bread has a blunt honesty. It prefers pressure to brilliance. You press, rock, sigh, and the crust answers softly, flaking only as much as decency allows. The heel comes away with its rounded shoulder and a small secret cave of crumb. You carry it to the place where no one sits and find, as you always do, that the board there keeps a cooler temper, as if wood learns reserve by proximity. You set a trencher before the empty chair, the spare disc kept for respectful nonsense. You lay the heel upon it, with the care you save for eggs and names. No ceremony beyond placement, no words beyond breath. The heel looks out over the room with the calm of something already sufficient. You remember to turn the cut side toward the chair, generosity pointed in the proper direction. A few crumbs escape and you do not chase them. Crumbs are scouts. They report that comfort is near. The beaker beside it holds its half measure, watered wine with the faint color of a late thought. You align trencher and table edge, and make tidy the small world in front of absence. Bread, cup, space, a plain trinity that does not need preaching. The hearth behind you keeps its slow arithmetic. A log turns, a coal brightens, the pot lets up a last barley breath. The room recomposes into familiar sounds, spoon against bowl, ladle against iron, slippers over rush. The heel, offered by being looked at, performs its steady trick of feeding things that are not hungry. You sit to see what a traveler would see. Trencher slightly forward of cup. Knife laid with back outward like a tame animal. Cloth square and honest. The cats, theologians of warmth, circle and decide the heel is not for them. They depart by pretending they were always going elsewhere. A child comes, remembers, and takes the tall stool instead of the honored place. You nod, and the day breathes easier for having passed a test without admitting there was one. You fetch a pinch of salt bread, enjoys companionship. A dusting on the trencher looks like frost and behaves like sense. You open the door a hand's breadth to let the morning finish its visit. Air moves through the room, across bread, over beaker, along the chair's arms. It takes nothing and leaves everything slightly more itself. The latch closes with a particular click that means we understand each other. You think of other tables, mint-scented stools, blue thread legs, side-long seats, stone slabs swept for luck. Every welcome has its equipment. Yours is heel and half cup and a chair angled to the world. You break a second thin piece for later and set it beside your bowl, away from the offering, the way daylight sits beside a candle without putting it out. The knife returns to its corner. You brush the flour from your fingers and hear the minute song it makes against skin. Because you are you, you check the placement again. Trencher, even with board. Heels dome facing the room. Cut smiling into the chair's shadow. Cup's chip turned inward to a companion who will never mention it. A neighbor steps in with a question about hens that quietly turns into weather. You point her to a seat that is not the spared place. She nods at the heel and does not speak of it, which is the best sort of speaking. Her hands find the warm bowl you pass. Steam writes soft words on her face. After she goes, the air folds back into its corners as neatly as a cloth. The unsat seat keeps its posture, as if rewarded by being left alone. You stand in that comfortable vacancy and let your breath drift toward the bread, toward the small space between trencher and chair, toward whatever listens. You imagine a traveler arriving at noon dusted with road and wonder, the way people wear wonder when they pretend they are only tired, and how their eyes would fall first on seat, then on heel, then on cup. Most arrivals can be greeted by the order of objects alone. Your house rehearses the gesture without needing applause. As the sun climbs the doorpost, you turn the heel a finger's width to guard the cut from drying. This is what care looks like when it is not being watched. You settle a flake of crust with a damp fingertip, dab the cup's ring because rings like to be understood, and smooth the table's edge where splinters dream of promotion. They accept the demotion back to patience. Somewhere outside, a wagon complains gently. The lane repeats its lesson about ruts. By none, the room will smell of wool and dust and human patience. The heel may be smaller, the beaker may be emptier, or not. Bread endures the gaze of hours without losing its nerve. If the day takes nothing, the offering does not sulk. If the day takes a bite, it does not boast. Either way, the seat where no one sits does its duty by not arguing with time. The chair listens. The trencher waits. The cup keeps its modest glimmer. Toward midday, you crumble a thumbnail-sized piece into the beaker's shadow, a habit learned from no one you can name. It is not an offering, merely a reminder that bread and time are kin. The crumb soaks a moment and then vanishes into quiet. You nod to the chair, as if it had done the clever part, which, in fairness, it has. You check the door once more, the hinge, the latch, the light, and then you do what you always do after setting bread where no one sits. You leave it. You return to the quiet labor that is louder than talk. Wiping, washing, mending, making room for returning. The heel rests on its round island. The chair keeps its good posture. The beaker holds watered resolve. You pass now and then and allow your gaze to feed them all. It is enough for every creature in the room, including you. You step toward the mill because grain moves at the pace of water, and water is steady company. The path keeps the familiar grit of chaff underfoot. The wheel's voice reaches you before you see it, a low round talk that says turning is just falling with manners. River breath is cool, flower air warm. They meet over the threshold. Inside, the day is pale with dust, the color of patience. Sacks lean like drowsy giants along the wall. Ropes hum. A pulley clears its throat. The hopper takes a slow sip of kernels and pretends to be surprised every time. You find the miller's stool where it always waits, broad, low, dependable, pushed back a hand's width from work, as if it has stepped aside to let duty pass. No one sits there this morning. You leave it so. The miller is off counting rivers in another place, or arranging scents with a spade, or walking the banks to talk the water out of mischief. His stool keeps his shape without being fussy about it. You set your hand on its seat and feel the press of 1,000 hours. Then lift your palm away the way one leaves a sleeping hound undisturbed. Flour lies on your skin like a blessing that does not make a show of itself. You rub fingers together and let the blessing float back to its home. The stool stays unclaimed, and you give it the courtesy of not pretending otherwise. A chair in a mill understands waiting better than most people do. It keeps its legs square on the plank, holding still while the wheel tells time in circles. You stand where the miller stands and watch the meal fall like dry rain into the bolter's mouth. The grain remembers field and sun, even as it becomes something else. You think, not quite aloud, about safe wheels and easy grain, about teeth in good repair and gears that welcome their neighbors. If grain takes advice, this is the advice it wants. Fall true, grind kindly, feed without drama. You find your tone falling softer near the empty stool, as it does near any honored absence. You say the miller's sort of words to the hopper there now. Steady mouth, keep your bite even, and the hopper, being wood and habit, obliges. The stool receives this whisper and stores it in the polish of its seat. Wood keeps counsel, dust keeps secrets, water carries both away and returns them cleaned. The wheel outside turns like a hymn nobody claims to have written. Its paddles lift, sink, lift, and each time the river agrees to be useful again. You step to the door and look at the narrow spill where foam sketches the same picture and calls it new. A boy lugs a sack and glances at the stool and then at you. You nod toward any other place but that one. He understands without being told. The body learns to read the pattern of spared seating long before minds decide to explain it. He props the sack near a post and dusts his shirt with pride. You tie off a mouth of grain with twine and smooth the knot as if smoothing a brow. The mill smells of stone rubbed friendly by use and of wheat deciding to stop being itself for your benefit. The stool waits, a low unlit fire of rest. You imagine the miller returning at noon, putting his weight there, and letting the wheel listen to his silence. You check the gear teeth for splinters, because splinters like to volunteer where they are not needed. The cogs behave, each tooth greeting the next with the courtesy of equals. A few grains jump the lesson and scatter to the floor. You fetch a broom and give them a small parade back to usefulness. The stool watches without opinion. Down by the sluice gate the handle sticks a little, prideful of last winter's swelling. You murmur to it as you work it looser, not a promise, not a bargain, just the tone that says we know each other's tricks. The gate decides to be reasonable. Water levels itself with a relieved sound. You return to the stool and place a beaker's twin on the shelf above it, half full of water with the creek's cold still on it. The cup stands in for the miller as the beaker stands in for your house's wind. You push the stool a thumb's breadth further back from the whir, an adjustment a cautious ghost might make before sitting. You consider the tales people tell about keeping a place. Saints with dusty sandals, soldiers with their swords wrapped kindly, travelers who bring news about roads that are all the same road. In a mill, you suspect the guest is simpler. Perhaps it is only the day itself, tired from turning, wanting a flat seat that knows about shoulders. You grant it. You rest your hand on the stool's worn rim once more, and place into the wood the sort of whisper that makes people laugh at you when they are not tired. Safe wheels, easy grain, stones that keep their temper, belts that do not sulk, sacks that hold without complaining. If flour hears, it hears. If it does not, it behaves anyway, which is the best kind of miracle. You sweep near the stool and leave a thin, neat crescent of untouched dust right under it, a half moon of patience that says the miller's day has a place to end when he returns. The broom's bristles whisper approval. You set the broom against the wall, and because habit is simply courtesy repeated, you breathe once more toward the stool, a ribbon of breath that says, keep whole to everything that turns. You step into the lane with the sack you brought to fill, and the sack filled generously. Your shoulder leans into the weight. The mill's door closes behind you with a sound that remembers 1,000 openings. You know the stool will keep its unclaimed duty until shoes scrape near it, and then it will accept a back and a sigh and a hat put on a knee. Until then, it is a vessel for quiet. Walking home, you find the river has followed you in your ears. Its round speech continues, telling you that falling with manners is the secret to usefulness, that patience is simply weight agreeing to be carried by time. You answer by angling your thoughts like a chair toward the next threshold and letting the day sit where it needs to, unhurried, steady, and kind. You take the jug with the grip you trust, hand to handle, thumb to shoulder, earthen weight familiar as your own name. The glaze shows a faint net of lines where heat once taught it a lesson and changed nothing essential. Cool seeps into your fingers from clay that has slept in the pantry's shade. You lift it just enough to let gravity remember what it owes you. The cup near the empty chair waits with the patience of fired earth. Its rim holds a shy shine. Its belly is the color of warm bread crust. You do not hurry the tilt. Drops are not persuaded by eagerness. They prefer invitation. You angle the jug until the surface inside nods at the lip, the small dark circle deep in the mouth of the clay answering with a slow yes to movement. The first drop leaves as if it had second thoughts, and then manners. It rounds itself, finds the cup's rim, and breaks into two smaller worlds that run opposite directions. They meet again with the good humor of siblings. The second drop follows with more confidence. The third remembers to look like luck. You do not pour enough to trouble anybody, just enough to wet the edge, just enough to mark the moment as noticed. Steam from the hearth meets the scent that rises a thin ribbon of watered wine and cellar cool. A reminder that vines have their own calendar and patience their own vintage. The room receives it and pretends it already had this fragrance in mind. You tilt a touch more. A bead gathers at the jug's lip, considers pride, chooses sense, and falls. The cup answers with the smallest sound, a kiss too modest to boast. You set the jug down by its place on the board with the careful thud that means we are done and still friends. Your fingertips slide along the cup's rim as if smoothing hair from a brow. The wet circle goes darker where you touch. You breathe toward it, not quite a word, not quite a wish, something halfway between steam and patience. The chair listens. Wood always listens, even when it pretends to be furniture. Not a blessing, you tell yourself, because you are not in the habit of making a spectacle of what needs no witness. Just a few careful drops for the spare seat, as if thirst might arrive without a body and need to be acknowledged before it goes on its way. You angle the chair a finger truer to the door, because welcome, like salt, insists on both measure and repetition. The beaker and cup sit as cousins, one for water that remembers the mill race, one for wine that remembers hills you have not seen. The trencher holds its heel, which remembers the oven better than any of you. You let your voice fall into the soft register the room understands. There now, you say to air with manners, roads be even, feet be steady, news be kind or at least brief. The cup keeps your breath on its rim. If anyone asked, you would say you were checking the glaze. No one asks. In this house, tact is the first grace learned and the last forgotten. The jug's handle has smoothed where generations argued pleasantly with weight. You lift it again to see whether one more drop is necessary. Necessary is a word that tries too hard. You choose decent instead. You grant the rim one last shine of dark wet, a ring thin as a thought you do not intend to keep. The cup's chip, small as a grain. You turn inward toward the chair, so a guest made of air will not have its lips scratched. Courtesy continues even when physics does not insist. From the lane comes the squeak the well makes when the rope shares its mind. A cart rattles a little and thinks better of it. Your door holds its seam of light just so. The honored place considers the world without demanding a story from it. You stand where a traveler would stand and see what they would see. A space prepared with accurate quiet. A chair turned to greet without crowding. A cup rim wet as a small promise kept. You do not cross yourself. You do not count. You breathe, which is the excellent habit of those who intend to be useful. Breath warms the bit of air between cup and chair, a warmth the size of a coin, and that is somehow plenty. You let drop a sentence under your breath, one of those old village lines that are more shape than meaning. Safe wheels, straight lanes, hands that find their own work. It is not a prayer. It is a way of speaking to gravity in its own language. The jug goes back to its corner near the wall, where light goes to rest after crossing the table. You wipe the little run that slid from rim to handle, and lick your thumb without thinking, tasting clay and faint vine, and the clean cold of the pantry. You set the cloth down folded to remind itself of corners. Everything likes to be reminded of its corners now and then. You take the cup in your palm to feel its weight, to be certain you have not asked too much of it. The wet rim cools your skin. You set it back exactly where the chair's shadow reaches as noon leans closer. Shadows are good company for promises. They require no explanation. Beside the cup, a few crumbs have arranged themselves into a nonsense constellation. You brush them together and leave them near the trencher. Stars put back into a small sky where they can continue their quiet business of being looked at without consequence. You check the distance from cup to board edge, 2 finger widths, and a patience. From cup to knife safe, with the blades back outward as always, so even metal understands when to appear harmless. From cup to chair close enough to be claimed without stretching, far enough to allow for surprise. These are measurements you do not confess to anyone, because no one needs to know how much care a simple room can hold. A fly tries to become relevant and fails. You wave it toward the window with a lazy benediction. The fire shifts. The pot, emptied of porridge, keeps a memory of warmth the way old people keep jokes. You set the lid ajar, so the room may borrow the last of its comfort. The jug in the corner makes a pear-shaped shadow that appears to nod. You decide not to comment. You say under the sound a mouth makes when it confirms what it has already done. Enough. And here in that word, the whole philosophy of small rituals. Not too much, not too little, not for show, not neglected. The chair does not answer because it has agreed to keep the secret of why such things matter. The cup gleams, the rim cooling as the wet dark fades to ordinary clay again, leaving only the memory of being attended to. If a wind comes at midday, it will pass by this table and find proof that someone considered its thirst. If no wind comes, the rim will dry, and the cup will have been no worse for kindness shown to no one in particular. You approve of arrangements that do not punish themselves for lack of audience. You step back and look as if you were a stranger. You recognize a house that knows what to do with empty places. Feed them lightly, water them a little, speak to them as if they were thinking, which in a way they are. You turn away while the cup and chair finish their mutual acknowledgement, because peeking at courtesy is impolite, even when both parties are wood and clay. In the humble quiet that follows, you begin again the plain work that both requires and rewards gentleness, folding a cloth, setting a bowl to dry, nudging a chair's leg into the exact square of its shadow. The drops you poured will disappear in a little while. The attention you gave will not. Wood keeps such things. So do rooms. So, if you are honest, do you. You change places with a cousin because the room asks for a different shape, and you have learned to say yes to shapes. He comes with cap in hand, eyes slipping past the honored gap as if it were a sleeping dog, and chooses a stool that would pinch the quiet. You stand, smooth the cloth with one palm, and offer a small map with the other. Here, there, not there. Softly, you say, but only to the air. The bench slides a thumb on its legs. The tall stool keeps its pride, but not its place. You gather your cousin by the sleeve the way one gathers a log toward the ember, so it will catch without smoke. You answer with the village hiss. That means, let the noise lie down. You step from bench to tall stool and leave your warmth where it will be missed. Your cousin sets his bowl down and allows you to turn his shoulders a touch, so his elbow does not trespass into the ring of hush around the empty seat. Geometry today is made with wrists, a hand's width for bowls to pass, 2 fingers from trencher to board, a thumb's breadth to respect the quiet. He learns the measures as quickly as smoke learns rafters. The hush is a moat kept full by attention. You treat silence like water. Touch it with a flat hand. Never stir it with a spoon. You draw the salt box a little farther from the gap so no one must reach across it and discover they are clumsy. The knife lies with its back outward, unthreatening. The beaker glimmers at its half. The heel of bread keeps its rounded shoulder toward the room, its cut turned inward like good manners. Someone enters, and forgetting, begins to sit where the hush would fray. You guide them with your chin toward the 3-legged stool. which accepts them as if summoned. The bench receives another weight without complaint. Your cousin's elbow explores and is folded back by your forefinger to live on his own side of the world. You say nothing. Saying nothing helps everyone hear. Hands pass bowls along the safe side, curling their path like a stream around a stone. A child drifts too near the gap. You send him across the room with a spoon to polish, so he may return improved. The hush brightens and minds its work. The door breathes, and the draft greets the empty chair first, as it should. You trade again. A modest dance with no music. You shift the tall stool one thumb back so knees will not strike the quiet. Your cousin turns to face the hearth instead of the door, leaving the unsat chair to keep its conversation with the threshold. You wipe a cup ring before it can become proud of itself. Your cousin tries a story that wants to hop the gap. You weight it gently with your palm. He nods. Stories accept borders when borders are courteous. Laughter begins to stand. You persuade it to sit. The room's edges round off. You mind the routes of speaking. Words travel along the wall from elder to bench to tall stool and back again, never across the kept space. When thanks are needed, knuckles touch the board instead of voices lifting over the chair's attention. When a plate must pass, it takes the far end and bows to the salt. The quiet remains unbruised, which is a kind of mercy. You check the measures again because care enjoys repetition. 2 fingers from cup to edge, 2 from cup to knife, the heel centered on its small island. The beaker's chip turned inward to spare any lip, even one made of air. The chair remains angled to the door, so welcome does not have to look for its mark. You breathe toward the space between seat and air, adding 1 coin's worth of warmth to its purse. Your cousin finishes half his bowl and remembers to set his spoon down before speaking, which keeps words from splashing. He thanks you without saying so, by adjusting the tall stool for the next arrival, just a thumb's breadth, exactly the sum the room prefers. The bench gives a minor creak of approval. A gust with straw on it inspects the beaker, finds the rim faintly dark from earlier courtesy, and behaves. You set your cousin's cup 2 fingers farther from the gap. He trades places with you, and now the pattern of talk runs along the hearth and back around the wall, like a cart track that keeps dry under trees. Speaking, like water, enjoys channels. You rake them smooth with glances. At last the room resolves. Elders tucked in the bench's warm place, quick ones perched on the stools, children orbiting with tasks too small to fail. The empty chair keeps its posture, listening to the door. The beaker has not forgotten itself. Your cousin has learned not to let his elbow fish in the quiet. You would compliment him, but compliments splash. You nod into your bowl and think that will do. Bowls find their bottoms. Crumbs choose sides. You shift back to the bench so habit can sit where it is happiest. Your cousin returns to the tall stool and looks content as a cat that has discovered a patch of sun. The hush holds round the unsat place like a small clear pond. It reflects nothing, which is why it reflects everything. He leans near and whispers that chairs must like you. You answer at the volume of ash falling through a grate that chairs like anyone who knows where to put an elbow. He hides a smile in his beaker. The lane exhales. The door does not mind. The cloth's hem lies square and harmless. The beaker keeps its quiet glimmer. The chair offers its patient face to the world and receives, with no effort at all, the most attentive silence any house can afford. You smooth the board once more, the long stroke that explains to wood it is understood. You leave the small geometry exactly as you found it, only more so. Then you step back into the hour's honest work, washing, wiping, listening with your hands, letting the room keep what you arranged. The hush remains intact, unspilled, and you, scholar of elbows and distances, accept the lesson. Move people, leave space, let welcome sit where it needs to, and let it do so undisturbed. You choose the orchard because noon prefers leaves. The dust along the path rises in polite ghosts around your sandals, and then remembers to settle. Sext is near, but the trees already hold the hour. A broad, green hush stitched with light. The bench waits at the edge of shade where sun still remembers how to be dappled. It is only a plank on legs, honest as a fence, polished by patient backs. You touch the grain and feel stored warmth like yesterday's agreement. You sit at one end and leave the other untroubled, as one leaves the edge of a loaf so the loaf may go on being itself. Wind arrives with the manners of a neighbor. You nod to it and arrange the smallest version of your room outdoors. Your folded cloak lies along the bench's middle to mark your place. A basket on the grass at knee's reach is tilted so its rim casts a darker patch. A companion shadow. An unsat place that holds still. From your lidded flask, you take 2 swallows of water that still remembers the jar's cool. You press a would-be splinter back into the bench with a wetted thumb. The heel of bread you saved rides out from your pocket wrapped in a square of cloth. You break 1 bite for yourself and let the rest face the companion shadow, a plain statement of sharing made to someone who will not trouble you by accepting. Bees work the clover and pretend you are not there. Shade slides a thumb's width across your sleeve. You decide that counts as labor accomplished. You shift until your shoulder blades find the bench's remembered hollow, and the wood decides you weigh exactly as much as calm should. You look at the darker patch you made. It is only shadow shaped by basket and branch, but the eye treats it like a guest. You lower your voice when you chew. You keep crumbs from rolling into knees that have no knees, which is the usual way courtesy behaves. Far off, a pear drops and apologizes into grass. You consider going to look and decide not to. The hour is generous, and you repay generosity by not spending all of it. Bells climb from the church in soft, round notes meant for leaning on. You make the sign you make with breath alone. In, out, slower now. The leaves keep talking to light and do not ask you to help. You speak toward the companion shadow the lines that keep habit smooth. Safe wheels, easy grain, hinges that remember their temper, chairs that hold their angle while you are gone. Bees that keep to their fences, children who keep their knees unbloodied until vespers. The shadow holds your words like a cool bowl holds water and gives back nothing. If a traveler paused at your gate, they would see that you are not solitary. You are accompanied by intention. A place is laid even here where there is no ceiling, and the village's manner holds. You fold another bite into your mouth and then stop, because offerings that pretend not to be offerings behave best when they look sufficient. Ants come to read the cloth and decide against it. You set the heel nearer the shadow without letting it touch close enough for an idea to find its feet. Bread prefers invitation to pursuit. Your back loosens. The bench warms to your shape. A spider the size of a lentil crosses the plank like a steward and disappears under the cloak. Somewhere, a boy rehearses a whistle. The second attempt is forgiven. You think how a day can be occupied and still accomplish nothing dramatic, and how this should have been taught. Through the leaves you can see your door. If you can see your door can see you. Between you and it, the space you keep inside chair angled, beaker at half, heel on its small island continues without your hand upon it. Shadow here, shadow there. The village keeps places by duplication. Absence, like dough, rises better if left alone. You shift the basket by a thumb, so the dark patch sits square with the bench's front leg. Your eye calms when squares discover one another. Along the bench's edge, your fingers find an old notch cut to discourage idle knives. You appoint that notch as a boundary for the companion shadow. Even silence benefits from tidy borders. A coin of sun lands on your knee and decides to stay. You breathe the slow, straw-shed breath that rooms teach. The orchard adopts it, and for a while, you and the trees share one pace. The bells finish, and time ambles downhill. You give the shadow one more nothing, in the tone one uses for a good ox. Steady lanes, doors that open before knuckles ache, news with no sharp edges, wheels that keep their polite circles. It is not that you think the shadow carries messages. It is that you prefer to leave no kindness unsaid, even to grass. When you rise, you do it by degrees so the bench will not think you ungrateful. Crumbs are brushed into your palm and set at the root's notch for birds and whoever else reads small gestures. The heel goes back into its cloth. You leave the companion shadow to unmake itself at its own pace. Shadows prefer dismissal by light rather than orders. You lift the basket, and the basket lifts the darkness from the grass and hands it back to day. The place looks briefly naked and then ordinary, which is a fine outcome for any ritual. The cloak goes over your arm and keeps a breath of orchard cool before it remembers the house. The bench keeps the warmth of you and promises not to tell. Walking back, you carry the orchard's whisper the way the mill's wheel rides your ear when you leave it. Not a noise, a companion. At the gate, You look both ways down the lane, as if you might see the person your shadow pretended to host. You see dust, sun, and scents. That is plenty. Inside, you will check the chair's angle and the beaker's rim the way one checks weather. For a moment longer, you stand with leaf smell in your clothes and bench grain in your palm and the outline of a companion shadow resting behind your eyes. You have rested. The seat you did not set has kept its manner, and the day, feeling seen, goes on with its chores at a more comfortable speed. You hear him before you see him, which is how officials prefer to arrive. The deliberate weight of boots grating the lane, a cough small enough to be mistaken for weather, the latch deciding to behave correctly on the first try. Your door opens at his knuckles' suggestion rather than its insistence. The parish beadle stands there like an apology in good clothes, hat in hand, eyes already on a mission to ignore the room's most interesting emptiness. You greet him at the volume that keeps stew from boiling over. His coat smells faintly of wax and rain. His ledger smells like decisions. He steps in, wipes one heel on the threshold because thresholds enjoy recognition, and surveys the furniture with the care a man gives to traps and invitations. His gaze visits the chair angled to the door and with great courtesy pretends it has never met. Only a moment, he says, which means long enough for paper to feel important. You answer with a nod that translates to neither of us will hurry, and both of us will leave thinking we didn't waste time. You gesture toward the tall stool by the hearth, the one that never pinches quiet, and you keep your palm slightly raised between him and the unsat place, not as a warning, more as shade cast by habit. He understands shade. He chooses the stool with a small, relieved grunt, and his boots scold the floor as if discipline should be contagious. You set his hat on the peg that forgives every hat. You straighten the cloth on the board, where his ledger can rest without catching splinters. He produces a quill with the dignity of a sparrow. A bottle of ink follows, cap clucked off with 2 fingers. He lays the book open and lets the page think well of itself. You angle the book so the light from the door does not fall across the empty chair's prerogative. Light, like officials, can be trained. Accounts, he says, as if the word were a broom. He lists numbers that behave for him because he makes no promises they cannot keep. Hens in 2s and 5s, measures of oats that pretend to be larger when nobody watches. A fence mended with optimism. You answer with the same syllables everyone answers, yes, mm, and the little non-word that means we know our bread better than we know our sums. He writes your answers into his book as if they were already printed there and merely needed permission to be seen. You bring the beaker and cup because hospitality does not read office. Water for any thirst, watered wine for any apology. You set the beaker by his elbow and the cup on the safe far side of the ledger, far from the hush around the unsat place. He reaches, then stops short of crossing the invisible line, then reaches the other way, a man who has learned to live under geometry. He thanks the beaker with an unheroic swallow and sets it down aligned with the page as if following a rubric. You drop your tone a note when you pass the chair and the cup, and the beadle drops his eyes in agreement with what he is not seeing. The heel of bread on the trencher keeps its round calm. The empty seat maintains its court with air. The beadle pretends to study a column, while he acknowledges none of this with a blink that says, I was not raised in a barn, and if I had been, the barn would have taught me manners. He asks after gates and geese and whether your hedge remembers its job. He asks as if the parish were a patient with chronic good health. You answer as if the hedge were a relative. He tuts once, a noise so small, it might be a fly changing its mind. He writes a note that undoubtedly means something to him, and will mean nothing to anyone else until the day it does. When you must fetch a paper from the chest, you go the long way rather than across the honored vacancy. He pretends not to notice you walking sensibly around a patch of floor that is indistinguishable from other patches. The ledger keeps breathing. His quill whispers an alphabet of opinions to the page. Ink forms a small lake at the tail of a word and dries before it misbehaves. He thinks a moment and then scratches 3 lines that add up to approval without joy. You slide a small dish of salt nearer to him, because counting goes better with company. He does not take any, but he likes that it could have been taken. He warms to his subject ditches and quotes a rule that has lived longer than either of you. You nod to the rule's endurance. He nods to your nod. The room adopts the pleasant hum of two people sheltering beneath the same umbrella of obviousness. When his eyes stray toward the angled chair, they pass over it like a tide that remembers not to flood. You admire the strength of his pretending. He admires the strength of your table. He clears his throat and edits your name on the page from one box to another, with a flourish that probably means the same thing in both places. Parish matter, he says, as if the parish were a basket that can carry any weight, if woven with enough syllables. He adjusts his stool by a thumb so his knee will not trespass into the circle of hush. Boots mutter approval. You wonder whether boots tell each other about rooms like yours when left together under benches. He drinks again, this time from the cup, a careful sip that lets the watered wine forgive his mouth. He places it back with the exactness of a man who knows that the second time is when mistakes happen. You ask after the beetle's mother because mothers in parishes run on the same fuel. She is as she was, he says, which is what one hopes to be said of everyone at this hour. He counts the hens from memory and gets the correct wrong number. You let it stand. He scratches another mark that balances some previous indulgence against today's restraint. The page looks pleased with its arithmetic. He closes the ledger with a sound like a door shutting out rain. He caps the ink, wipes the quill, and arranges the tools of certainty with the tidy affection of a man who has no other friends in the room. You hand him his hat. He places it on his head without inviting it to a discussion. The stool sighs when he leaves it, the way furniture sighs when released from duty. At the threshold, he pauses, listening to the lane as if someone might call his name with an emergency that turns out to be a goat. No one does. He thanks you with the words reserved for doors that opened at a sensible speed, and for rooms that keep one seat unsat without making a religion of it. You return the same words adjusted for encounter length. When he steps out, you see the ledger bob once, as if relieved to be back in air. The latch returns to its notch with the right little clack. His boots discuss gravel with the frankness of boots. You stand in the cleared stillness he leaves behind, and glance at the chair angled to the door, the beaker with its half glimmer, the trencher's calm curve. The unsat place is not noticed office or ledger. It is noticed light and draft, and the shape of your breath. You approve of its priorities. You move the beaker a finger back from the ledger's ghost, and straighten the cloth where the page pressed a crease. The chair requires nothing. The room, having endured officialdom without being bored into splinters, resumes its ordinary courage. In the silent space he did not occupy, you place a small exhale, the sort that thanks wood for listening. Then you pick up the day where you left it, which is to say, you do not pick it up at all. You let it continue, and you agree to accompany it. You spread the fresh rushes on the floor beside the doorway, because light likes to approve materials before they become furniture. The stalks lie in a clean green bundle, river scent clinging like a polite dog. You cut the muddy heels away with your small knife, the one that minds its edge, and lay the trimmed ends toward the sun, so they can practice being civilized. The door stays ajar. A narrow wedge of lane slips in to supervise. You fetch these from the slow bend beyond the willow, where water mutters about stones and then forgives them. You chose the long, even ones with patient spines, the way you choose people for a long job. Length enough, temper steady, no show-off bumps. Yesterday, they soaked in the trough until they learned flexibility. This morning, they pass your hand like tame snakes with useful opinions. You run your thumb along each. The skin squeaks faintly where the pith says, I am ready. The stool to be mended waits with the humility of a thing that still has legs. Backless, square, honest, its rails polished by years of grudging affection. You turn it upside down, feet in the air like a calf at christening, and check the pegs where the rails meet the legs. Firm, you approve of joinery that admits to age without confessing to weakness. You tie your apron tighter and make a small order on the floor, rushes by length, knife within the map of your knee, all braced in the crack of a board so it won't wander, a dish of water to re-wet stubborn stalks, and the stool like a small fort in the middle. You pick the first rush, split it with your nail to open the back, then fold it upon itself until it behaves like rope that smells of summer. Your hands remember this better than your mouth could explain. You anchor the starting length around the back rail, with the simple half-turn that old rushers use when they want a thing to hold without boasting. Pull, flatten, smooth with the heel of your hand. You pass the free end across to the front rail, under, around, back again, making the first two bands that give a seat its premise. The stool makes the small, appreciative creak furniture gives, when included in its own repair. The doorway shares its rectangle of brightness. Dust dances, but never tires. A neighbor's cart rolls by and minds its wheels. Your breath finds the pace of the weave. Inhale to fetch, exhale to pull. A small hum to persuade the rush to settle. The rhythm repeats until time agrees to pass without being counted. You keep the strands flat with the side of your thumb. The green skin shines where it overlaps itself, as if pleased by company. You twist a second length. Marry it to the first with the merest overlap, no knot. Just faith and pressure, and continue the pilgrimage around the rails. When the rush threatens to crack, you dip your fingers in the dish and stroke it until it forgives you. Rush prefers fairness to force. You are content to be fair. The doorway admits a pair of boots attached to a pair of legs attached to a child who has been sent to ask after eggs and returns home with news instead. He leans, curious, but you steer him with a spoon to the safer end of the room. Soft feet, you say, which solves many problems. He learns to watch from the bench. The empty chair near the table keeps its angle to the door and pretends to ignore the lesson being woven on the floor. Each turn of the rush lays a new line, and each line presses the last into obedience. You begin the diagonals, the pleasing X that makes a seat noble instead of merely possible. Over, under, across, around. Rails accept the snugness, as if they always intended it. Your awl persuades a stubborn loop to lie flatter. You withdraw it with a flourish reserved for tools that cooperate. The stool grows a green cushion that will dry to the straw color everyone trusts. Between lengths you cut away the feathered ends and tuck the truth under the next truth. The floor collects thin curls of rush like notes from a lazy scribe. You save the longer trimmings for the hearth. Rush burns with the quick cheer of something that approves of becoming ash. The shorter bits you brush into your palm and tip into the basket for kindling. Nothing deserves scolding today. Without quite deciding, you set one long, even coil aside, sound, supple, a little brighter than the rest, and lay it across the door peg above the stool. Your hands remember to leave it there, a spare that will not be used. The coil looks like potential resting. It is for the chair that already has enough, the one that requires no mending, only notice. You pretend you are keeping it for a future repair. You and the room do not argue with such pretense. You carry on. Band, tuck, pull. The diagonal crosses thicken into a tidy star at the center. The pattern rush workers in every village know and never bother to rename. Your shoulders loosen under the door's narrow sun. The lane contributes a sniff of horse and an opinion about wheels. You answer by tightening the turn at the back left rail, paying your respect to corners, which keep nations and stools intact. When the seat is nearly full, you pause to test it with your palm. It has the spring of bread under a cloth before the bake. You add 2 more courses for honesty, then one last lap of binding that walks the perimeter and says, in rush language, behave. You press all down with both hands even, kind. The seat answers with quiet firmness, a new surface that will soon learn the temper of whoever sits upon it and meet them exactly halfway. You trim the tails with your small knife, blade angled away from ambition. The cut ends hide like well-raised children. You rub the hole with a damp hand until the green shines and the cross tightens its lips. You set the stool on its feet and press both palms into the seat to speak skin to weave. Hold, forgive, last. The rails answer with a minute groan that means yes, and also mind the humidity. You promise to mind it. You lift the stool and carry it to its rightful place by the wall, warm side of the hearth, where quick ones will perch and then hurry off, leaving the seat grateful to have been sat on briefly and well. Not the honored gap, never the gap. The chair by the table, angled to the door, receives your glance as the stool passes and pretends not to smile. You return to the doorway and take down the coil you kept aside. You run it through your fingers once more, smoothing its green like a thought you might have said aloud but decided to keep. You hang it instead on the peg that watches over the empty chair, a small loop of readiness, witnessing a place that asks for nothing. The coil will dry there, golden, unspent. The chair will carry on being complete without it, which is the point. You sweep the floor, gather the rush shavings, and make a snug bundle for later fire starting. The dish of water winks at a slant of sun. You close the knife as if closing a small door. The stool in its new dress looks as if it has remembered its purpose and forgiven you for the delay. You give it a friendly pat, and it gives you quiet back. Before you close the door against the brightest edge of afternoon, you breathe one ribbon of air toward the space between the unsat seat and the table. The same small warmth you have been investing there since morning. The coil on the peg keeps its modest promise. The chair keeps its angle to the world. The room keeps your pace and asks for nothing more complicated than this. Mend what needs mending. Leave a little extra for what needs only to be seen. Sit when you must. Stand when you can. Let wood keep the secrets you press into it with clean hands. You take stock of furniture as if greeting cousins, because names keep a household from tripping over itself. Your palm travels the bench. It repeats its biography without boasting cradle of elbows, catcher of naps, friend to bowls that drift. You call it breadback for learning the shape of leaning while chewing. The three-legged stool earns spindle for surviving every crooked plank the house has ever laid. It forgives floors better than people do. The tall stool becomes watchpost, proud of its height and willing to lend decisions to anyone who climbs it. The table earns fieldboard because grain and talk both thresh themselves out across its scars. The chair angled toward the door refuses a name when you test a few on it. Names make claims. That chair prefers courtesy. You hold a few on your tongue anyway, just to hear them land in air. Wayfarer's mercy, wind's elbow, saint's pause. None suits. The chair listens without consenting and keeps its angle like a polite uncle who attends every wedding and avoids every speech. You try naming the spaces instead, because emptiness behaves better when invited into the family. The place under the window becomes yawn for the habit of afternoons there. The warm square by the hearth is quiet shoulder. The threshold step, scooped into a shallow bowl by generations of feet, becomes patience, since it holds everyone for the breath between out and in. The gap around the unsat chair you call listening, but only in your head. It would blush if it knew. A blue thread ties loosely at your cuff to remind you to untie nothing that does not need untying today. You set the beaker a finger nearer listening, and the heel of bread exactly square on its little island, because names, once given, like angles to match them. Breadback accepts your hip and remembers to be generous. Spindle waits where children can borrow it and learn balance the honest way. Watchpost guards the corner with the good posture of a sermon. As you sweep, you say the name softly in a line, a chant that keeps your hands from hurrying. Breadback, spindle, watchpost, fieldboard. The broom writes the same in dust and erases itself politely. You tip crumbs into your palm and deliver them to the sill for birds that do not need your help but accept your manners. You try naming by task. Spindle is spin aside when you set yarn near it. Breadback is nap harbor when a hat chooses it. Watchpost becomes coat perch when rain arrives with the parish. Fieldboard is count without quarrel while you sort measures. The nameless chair cycles through everyone's jobs without keeping any. An elder exempted from chores who nevertheless sets the pace of the room. You grant it the invisible title Keeper of Angle and leave it unspoken, which is the correct pronunciation. Neighbors drift past and nod as if they can hear what you are not saying. A woman borrows spindle for an hour and promises to be kinder than floors are. The stool goes willingly. The floor, being itself, makes no promises. Breadback hosts her parcel while she ties her scarf and leaves 2 words of weather behind the salt. Watchpost accepts her thanks by pretending to need none. When you return each piece to its rightful place by its new used name, the room relaxes as if it recognizes itself. To be sure the names are true, you read rails and rungs with your fingertips. Here is the notch where a distaff once nibbled. Here the burnish where bowls halt before they learn to sit. Here the faint sticky patch where honey misunderstood a boundary. Naming is memory said out loud. You keep your voice small so the unsat chair will not feel cornered by language. It prefers to be addressed by the turn of your wrist and the softness of your breath. Tools receive their courtesy too. Ladle is river spoon. Knife is gentle. Edge today. Its back turned outward. Broom is tale of sense. The pot cooling on its trivet is field rememberer. Even the folded cloth near the beaker earns a modest title, hem of welcome. Names tidy your mind the way sweeping tidies the floor, moving the day's small clutter where it can be found without fuss. When you step back, you see a household introduced to itself. Breadback leans friendly to fieldboard. Spindle waits like a good story. Watchpost keeps its square of authority without casting shade. The nameless chair holds the door in its eye and the hush in its lap. Listening, the space around it behaves exactly as its name promises. It receives the draft first. It takes the light with good manners. It holds your murmurs and returns them calmer than you sent them. You speak the final roll like a sext for furniture and spaces alike. Breadback, spindle, watchpost, fieldboard, hem of welcome, river spoon, gentle edge, field rememberer, patience, quiet shoulder, yawn, listening. The list ends without insisting on a last word. The chair, flattered and unstirred, keeps its angle toward the door. You set one breath into its province, which is as close to a christening as this household allows. And then you go on with your sweeping, as if you have done nothing at all, because this is how names prefer to work. Held lightly, used gently, and forgotten the instant they have helped the room remember itself. You carry eggs to market in the steady hand you save for small architectures. The lane rehearses its opinions. Wheels that think well of themselves, dogs that insist news travels better with a bark, children who count copper more fluently than Latin. The square gathers itself around the cross and produces its weekly rumor of fairness. You let the basket rest on the public bench that knows every spine and listen the way a weaver listens, to thread feeling for tension more than words. The talk is not about saints, not officially. It is about weather and grain and whether the West Road is lying again. Under those topics walks the lighter creature everyone prefers to feed, the habit of keeping one chair unsat. The herbwife keeps her stool sidelong, mint tucked beneath. She says she sleeps better when she leaves a place a little hungry. The cobbler, trimming leather with a knife that understands feet, mentions a low seat outside his door that Weather owns after Compline. Keeps the boots honest, he says, which is politely ridiculous. A peddler unwraps bright tins and brighter opinions. He speaks of a town beyond the third bridge where people keep a whole bench free in winter, so the cold may sit and present its case instead of creeping up the stairs. They call it frost share. He takes one egg for the story, and you feel you got the better of the trade. Near the fish stall, a girl explains that her grandmother lays a yellow ribbon over one stool each feast day, so saints will know which seat is theirs if they forget they are saints. The fishmonger smiles into his salt. He keeps an upended crate by the shore for the tide to rest on when it arrives overworked. He denies this when the beetle buys herring, affirms it the moment boots pass on. People invent reasons that suit their temper. Some say the empty place is for travelers, because all of us are travelers when we are tired. Some say it is for the poor to be rich for an hour in the currency of being expected. Some say wind, because wind likes manners. Some say memory, because memory takes smaller bites when fed daily. You argue with none of them. Market day eats certainty too quickly for it to be worth bringing from home. You buy onions from a man who never looks up and yet knows every shoulder by its feet. He says his mother kept a cup for strangers all her life and died convinced the cup taught her the trick of quiet. I drink less water now, he says, but more silence. He counts your change twice and hands you the correct wrong number that means goodwill. You tuck it into your apron as if agreeing to remember his mother's cup when you pour your own. A juggler balances on a barrel and remembers why he does not perform here. He bows to laughter and points at a stool no one will touch until he leaves. For luck, he lies. You know better. A circle of room where people have decided to be kind without congratulating themselves. A seamstress lays out needles like little church towers and leaves a space between them for the eye to rest before it learns to thread. You visit that space with a glance. It nods back. You set your basket on your knees and check for the hairline cracks conversation can make. None. You barter a dozen for salt, a dozen for yarn the color of damp straw, and keep 3 to justify bringing a basket home. At the far end, a mason sells offcuts of stone for thresholds and declares he sweeps one slab clean each evening, so luck will notice his house has manners. He says it works. You do not ask for proof, because proof makes luck shy. Before noon, the bells rehearse their round. Stalls fold into bundles of themselves. You watch who leaves a seat angled to the lane even as they pack. Habit survives disassembly. The herb wife rescues her mint and still keeps the stool sidelong for an extra moment no one will use. The cobbler hangs his awl and taps the low seat's leg like a host thanking a servant. The fishmonger turns the crate to catch the tide of stray dogs instead of water and calls it charity. Homeward, you count kept places and feel richer, as if you had walked through a store of something you cannot carry. Space told it may remain space. Your pockets hold a little salt, a coil of yarn, 3 eggs, and a pocket full of other people's reasons for the same courtesy. You bring them home the way people carry tunes they cannot sing but enjoy humming. At the door, you put the basket down and angle the nameless chair the width of a thumb more generous. Not because market told you to, but because you have been reminded of your own reasons. Wind has its manners. Memory eats more slowly when fed. Travelers may arrive honestly, or you may make a good story for them by being ready. You set a breath into the space between seat and air, and it sounds like the market settling after using its voice all morning. Not tired, exactly content from having spent what it brought. You choose a clay cup that knows about strangers, one with a lip a little thicker than pride, the sort that forgives clumsy hands. The glaze keeps the tiny freckles of a kiln that did not promise perfection, and therefore rarely disappoints. You rinse it in the jar's cool mouth until the water's face on the cup looks calm enough to greet anyone without flinching. You set it where the unsat chair can see it, which in this house is the same as saying where the door can see it. Half water, half wine, because generosity should be sober enough to carry its own feet. You pour to the middle line you keep in your eye, a modest tide that knows when to turn. The cup takes the measure with a small, pleased quiet. You turn the chip to face the chair, so even a guest made of dust will not find the fault first. The beaker keeps its post beside it like a sensible cousin, one for thirst, one for welcome's idea of itself. The knife lies with its back outward. The trencher keeps the heel turned inward, cut protected. The folded cloth becomes a hem of welcome. You rehearse what you will say if anyone comes who is too human to understand silence. There now, sit. Water first, then a bite. Speak when your breath is no longer busy. The words taste right, but you hope not to need them. Houses do their best hosting before mouths remember their lines. You lower your voice as you test the cup again, which is as close as you come to practice. The muleteer from the far farm appears shaped like dust, holding itself together. You make a small show of adjusting watchpost instead. The unsat chair keeps its angle, which is all the invitation a tired back requires. He nods to it and sits the other side of the board, because he has learned the village's dialect of kindness. You slide the stranger cup a finger toward the center, and do not watch him catch it. You pass the heel, and look only long enough at the knife to remind it that hospitality prefers bluntness. He drinks without announcing thirst, and eats without complimenting bread, which is a relief to bread. He uses 2 hands on the cup, because one hand has been hauling a rope all morning and does not trust itself. His boots apologize to your floor in the language of dried mud. He keeps his voice low because your voice is low. He tells you exactly as much as you need to wish him an easy road and not enough to be asked for advice. You approve of a guest who knows how to be here and not the whole way here. Steam from the hearth raises small, gentle thoughts and sets them down again. The door remembers to breathe in his direction first, because draft has manners. The cup returns to the board with a ring that is more gratitude than stain. He asks nothing about the chair and honors it more thoroughly by not noticing it particularly. Your house grows a size larger for a moment without moving its walls. When he rises, he sets the cup with its lip touching the cloth, as if it had wanted to learn linen. He turns the seat back to the door with a courtesy that makes you like his mother. He leaves a small corner of bread untouched, as people do who understand the difference between finishing and taking. You show him the jar to refill the cup. He declines with a hand that has remembered its strength. You rescue the cup to its place by the chair and say nothing at all. After he goes, the room keeps the shape of him for a while, the way a pond keeps a stone after it sinks. You rotate the cup to let the wet ring dry away from the chip. You smooth the cloth's hem and relight nothing that does not need fire. The unsat chair looks as it did before, which is the point. Ready without much memory of being used. Readiness that boasts becomes a shrine. Readiness that forgets becomes a custom. You think of arrivals that will not come, pilgrims turned by weather, cousins held by fences, tradesmen who changed roads, and the cup serves them too, invisibly. A thing laid out for strangers is also laid out for the part of you that keeps starting over. You set your breath in the space again, and watch the air accept it without accounting. The latch does not argue. Near dusk, a pair of children arrive, with a question about geese. That is truly a question about how far voices travel. You place them on spindle and watchpost, safe from listening circle, and answer in the tone that teaches whispering without making anyone feel corrected. They practice drinking from the stranger cup with 2 hands, because 2 hands make respect easier. You pour water to the line. You pour out what remains. Lessons should not leave rings. When the house is your own again, you return cup, beaker, trencher, knife, and cloth to their exact small map. The stranger cup sits a finger behind the beaker now, as if one guest were keeping an eye on another. The heel still faces inward. The chair still makes the door braver. You let the room breathe and call that enough. You have made a place for people and for the idea of people, and the idea is the more frequent traveler. You wish it a good road by not saying anything more at all. You fold the dough as if speaking to it with your hands, knuckles telling the flour what the tongue would spoil by saying, warm water, a pinch of salt. A handful of yesterday's patient leaven field rememberer receives them without drama and gives you back a soft weight that understands being asked to rise. You turn it, lift it, lay it down. Heel of the palm presses, the heel of the day answers. The table's scars approve. Your breath slows until it keeps time with the dough's quiet stretch. You choose the corner of the board nearest the unsat chair, because bread likes to learn its manners early. A sprinkle of flour falls like ash from a friendly fire. You draw a line through it with 2 fingers and call that line sense. The dough accepts a fold, then another, tidy as a blanket on a sleepy child. You listen for bubbles the way a shepherd listens for bells, not loudly, not carelessly. Between turns, you speak a few very small words into the space beside the chair, safe roads, unstartled hearts, fences that remember to close themselves, words that prefer to be warmed before they are believed. The room grows that sweet, damp smell that says patience will be rewarded by chew. You oil the bowl with a thumb's worth of gloss and bed the dough as if tucking a traveler for a short nap. The cloth goes over, hem of welcome turned toward the chair. You rest the bowl where the air passes first, so the draft can lend its measured stride. It will rise there, watched by wood that knows what it means to swell and settle, and by a seat that knows what it means to be kept. You wash your hands in the jar's cool judgment. Water turns cloudy with the ghost of flour and returns to clear, as if reminded who is in charge. You rub your wrists dry on apron, and on the way back smooth the cloth's edge, as though the bowl might blush if left with wrinkles. The beaker at half keeps its quiet light. The trencher's heel gazes inward, sermonless. You lower your voice around all of it, because dough and silence are cousins. While the dough remembers its courage, you prepare the hearth for evening's slower talk. Coals gather. A small stick lays its argument over them and is persuaded. Pothooks speak in their iron dialect. The ladle nods to its plate. You set aside a pinch of salt for the top of the loaf, and save another pinch for the little speech you give the chair without giving it. Not a blessing. The village has more of those than it has sheep. Just a line folded under like butter. Let fear be late. Let kindness arrive early. Let footsteps find themselves softer than they planned. A child wanders too close to the rising, and you teach the ritual of tiptoe, that elegant art of not disturbing air. He practices with fierce seriousness, lips twisted around silence the way a grown man twists rope. You grant him the honor of peeking under the cloth, and he nods like a steward. On his way past the chair, he remembers to keep his elbows inland. The dough puffs, as if pleased to have been admired exactly once. By the time Vespers clears its throat in the tower, the dough has lifted like a modest hill. You tip it out, shape it with firm kindness, score it with gentle edge one long line. Too short, a map the oven can read without boasting. A last brush of water, a small snow of salt, and you slide it into heat that forgives everything but haste. The lid shuts with a cat-like blink. You wait without pretending you are not waiting. In the lull, you set a little bowl, the size for berries, you do not own beside the chair's beaker. and place in it 3 crumbs, no larger than truth. Not an offering, a rehearsal for sharing. The crumbs darken as they accept air. The cup keeps its exact horizon. You breathe once into the gap, then step away, as if you have been caught admiring something that belongs to someone else. When the loaf knocks the pot from within, you answer with your own knuckle and agree it is ready. Steam escapes as if it has remembered a joke and will not repeat it. You lift the bread to the board and let it rest where the day can smell its own success. The first cut is for the room, a thin slice that cools the knife and teaches the loaf not to be proud. You lay that slice on the trencher by the chair and pretend you always do it this way. Evening settles like flour on sleeves. The dough you folded along with your small whispers has become food that makes talk unnecessary. You carve, pass, nod, chew. The beaker gleams. The chair holds its angle. The crumbs in the little bowl have learned to be sufficient. You think, not loudly, that ordinary is the correct miracle, and that folding anything dough, breath, hope, works best when done, where wood listens and air keeps your secrets. You stand in the doorway when the bells finish, letting their last round note hang on your ribs like a cloak. Vespers gives the lane its wintered light. Your threshold answers by remembering how many feet it has carried without choosing favorites. You keep the door just shy of wide, an opening with manners, and you let the wind decide how much of itself to bring in. It chooses the part that smells of turned earth and sensible smoke. The chair holds its outward gaze, a sentinel whose only weapon is posture. You touch the top rail one slow stroke from left to right, so it will know you have noticed its watch. Then you lean your shoulder to the jamb and join it, 2 guards agreeing to report nothing unusual. The beaker on the board glimmers like a very small promise that has never failed. The heels cut faces inward like a shy thought that is nonetheless correct. The cup keeps its place, thick lip honorable. Across the lane, geese debate bedtime like aldermen. A cart chooses to squeak on even ground. The millrace says a few words to the churchyard and returns without needing to be convinced. You listen to these things and to the space between them. The space is where gossip rests its feet after too much day. You admit it, then direct it to sit quietly near the hearth. It does not argue. Your door inhales and exhales with the house. On the outbreath, a thin ribbon of warmth brushes the chair's front rung. On the in-breath, the chair seems to nod, though that is only your eye telling you what you wish would say. You think the sentence, "You always think at this hour, let the night pass through without catching," and you set it down between the beaker and the trencher, where such sentences grow mild. Someone's late shoe scuffs the lane and then decides to try again tomorrow. A scrap of song passes by without words. You lift a brow and let it go on being free. From within, the pot mutters that it remembers being useful. You make the small circuit from door to hearth and back again, not because anything needs you, but because circuits teach rooms to trust their own edges. You turn the chair a finger toward the darker end of the path, because welcome should point where nerves begin. The angle is the width of your patience. You measure it with your breath. In for the turn, out for the placement. Fieldboard creaks its approval. The floor rolls its one old grievance and puts it away. The latch sighs the way iron sighs when it has been asked nicely rather than told. The bell's echo dwindles into the soft quarrel of doves. You picture the beetle going home counting rules he will not need tonight. You picture the herb wife tucking mint under a stool that will hum with it till matins. You picture your own bench remembering shoulders and your own bed borrowing the smell of clean rush from the floor. The chair keeps the world in its line of sight as if the world had earned it. A moth arrives like a question and leaves like an answer that cannot be written down. You smooth the cloth where a wrinkle thought to practice rebellion. You count the spoons without counting, one for each ordinary person you love, and one left clean because it pleases you to be ready for someone who might only exist in the way readiness exists. The beaker's rim dries and glosses itself again. You moisten it with a touch and let it be. The lane grows the kind of quiet that means true dark is walking up the hill. You would be indoors save that your house prefers one person outside when night decides itself. So you stand where you can see into the room and out onto the earth. The pivot that keeps both kinds of tidiness from forgetting each other. Your breath makes a small ghost. It pauses where the chair's seat would accept it, then goes about its wider errands. When you finally close to the latch, you do it softly so the hinge will not think closing is a victory. The bar finds its bracket with the modest authority of experience. You leave the chair, as it is facing the door, with its reasonable expectation that doors behave, and you take 3 steps toward the hearth with the authority of someone who believes the night has heard your request to pass through unhooked. Behind you, the latch remembers Vespers and decides to keep what it knows. You teach the little ones hush by giving it things to do. First, you show them how to carry a spoon, as if it were a sleeping mouse. Fingers under, thumb gentle, arm steady as a pew. They practice the walk from bench to hearth and back, the spoon's round face reflecting their fierce concentration. Each safe arrival earns a crumb of bread, because even silence learns better with food. Next, you show them the elbow law, that invisible fence around listening, the gap beside the unsat chair. You draw the border with a line of crumbs you later gather, a map that teaches without scolding. Knees inside, voices below stew, you say, which is a recipe they can keep. They nod with solemn eyebrows. The way children nod when they feel the weight of being trusted with a thing adults forget is delicate. You lower your voice until the room leans in. They lower theirs until their own ears must help. You have them pass the beaker halfway and back again, 2 hands under, eyes on the horizon of the rim. One almost laughs and clamps his mouth with the drama of a saint denying pie. You award him the noble work of folding the cloth's hem smooth. He pets it into obedience, proud of the strength it takes not to be strong. The chair listens. Wood is an approving ant stored in a tree. The little ones notice without looking at it, which is the proper way to notice a thing intended to be kept. You lead them by the door with their softest heel, teaching the hinge how praise sounds when it is absence. Draft slides past their ankles and finds the honored space first, learning their names by the sound of their breathing. You give them the prayer that is not a prayer. Safe wheels, easy grain, no splinters that bite twice. They whisper it in the rhythm of sweeping, and then you hand them the broom, tail of sense, and let them ride on the floor with it. The rush bristles murmur approval, a language every child speaks by instinct. They make a clean crescent under the table and keep it clear of the gap as if borders were born in them. A fly tries to become a lesson and is dismissed. The pot bumps once as if remembering a story and then forgets it politely. You set out 2 small cups with water to the first line and have the children carry them to watchpost and back, walking the long way around listening. The taller child chooses to be humble. The smaller chooses to be tall. Both arrive with the exact amount left in the cup that says learning happened. There is clatter, because the village believes in mercy. You fold that clatter into the kind that makes a room more itself. Cup to board, spoon to plate, shoe to threshold, laugh to sleeve. You show them how to aim laughter into cloth when necessary, a trick that will keep them in good company the rest of their lives. They practice until the cloth feels important and the room breathes easier. You invent the game of shadow guest. One child is wind, one is traveler, one is memory with sticky hands. The wind goes first through the door and sits in the unsat chair by not sitting. The traveler sees the beaker and the trencher and knows they are already welcome. Memory stands at the edge and does not interrupt. Everyone bows to no one. You clap once, a pinch of thunder to season the calm. To end, you let them place a single crumb in the little bowl by the beaker. The crumb looks huge to small fingers. They lower it into air as if delivering a chick. It lands and becomes part of a constellation that nobody will read and everyone will obey. They stare at it a moment as if it might grow. It does not. They accept that too. When they go, you return the room to its unremarkable perfection. Crumbs gathered, cloth squared, beaker's rim taught its gloss again. The chair keeps its angle, having observed children learning to pass by without demanding a witness. You give the smallest one a secret, a pinch of salt to carry, and tell him it is for remembering to be careful with elbows. He swears an oath on his pocket. The older one asks if chairs sleep. They listen, you say, and he nods in a way that suggests he will test this theory on a day when you are not looking. Silence, newly employed, settles in to hold the hour. You let it, because there is no craft finer in a village than to teach noise where to stand and when to bow. You sit at the loom because thread makes a cleaner argument than most people. The backless stool spindle when it is near yarn. Anyhow, when the floor waves accepts your weight without remembering to complain. You set warp in the teeth with the tidy bite the reeds prefer. You pass weft through with a shuttle that has learned your wrist. The room narrows to a lane between heddles where order decides to be beautiful. Clack, pull, press, release. The heddle answers in a house dialect you have spoken since childhood. The cloth grows by the width of patience. Each pick convinces the last to become background. You admire the honesty of a backless seat. It asks the spine to participate and gives nothing it cannot afford. When you shift, it shifts. When you square yourself, it applauds by not wobbling. Across the room, the nameless chair faces the door and says more by keeping still. You watch it between passes, a landmark that does not require walking. Your foot finds the treadle. Your breath finds the count. Your mind finds the space where village talk cannot visit without a shuttle. You do not hide here. You adjust. A thread snarls, as threads do when they remember they were once plants with opinions. You smooth it over your tongue and it forgives you. The shed opens like a sensible mouth. The shuttle flies like a sparrow that has decided to be professional. You beat the weft home and think of the gap by the chair. A woven absence the room has agreed to include. Cloth without holes cannot breathe. Houses without spared seats forget they are not barns. You remember the market stories, frost chair, ribbon stools, crates for tides, and not a selvage's loose pride back into its place. The weft line resumes its straight talk. You change colors with the indifference of seasons turning. Dock leaf green into barley brown. A narrow stripe the eye can lean on when it tires. The stool holds you steady while you pull long. The back's work shared by shoulders and sense. The shuttle taps the frame twice. A small petition for attention. You examine the fell where new cloth meets finished decisions. Even modest, earning no praise it does not need. You think how a house becomes a garment everyone wears together, and how the unsat chair is the buttonhole that keeps the fastening honest. Too tight, and the shirt tears. Too loose, and it forgets to be a shirt. When you rest your hands, the stool reveals its entire theology. Sit as if you are glad to be here. Leave no mark that cannot be sanded with a palm. Return when useful. It says this by being exactly what it is, and nothing more. You look again at the other chair, the one with a name you keep refusing to say. It carries the village's voice by staying quiet, which is an advanced skill. You lengthen the weft to finish the day's measure. Threads lay down their arguments and join the majority. Your ankle finds the treadle's sweet spot. The beat lands with the confidence of someone who has never been late to a field. From door to hearth, the rhythm persuades the room to breathe. With it, inhale into shed, exhale into beat. Even the fly is improved by it. When you cut the cloth loose, it relaxes, proud because it has been made, and modest because you did not brag at it while making. You roll it on the beam and tie it with a strip the color of patience. The stool gets a kind pat on the seat that tells it you will be needing it again tomorrow. It accepts congratulations by not tipping over. You carry the new cloth past the chair, angled to the door, and lay it across breadback, so it will learn the shape of resting backs. On your way back, you check the beaker's horizon and the trencher's center. The chair remains a calm witness. You salute it with a breath, and let the loom's rhythm drain from your wrists into the floorboards, where it will keep time with whatever feet come after dusk. You bank the fire until it wears a crown of small glows, each ember a coin you have saved against the evening. The poker writes channels through ash. A brighter thread wakes beneath, runs along the groove, and pauses at the chair's shadow as if to greet it. You decide that counts as attendance. Heat moves with a cat's discretion. It puts one paw on the rung and leaves no mark but memory. You place a split stick just so, bridging yesterday's coals and tonight's modest ambition. It catches with the sigh of something that has been chosen gently. The pot above it keeps quiet, because quiet is the better smell for this hour. You draw the bench closer, but not too close. Benches, like being near events, they do not have to star in. The chair keeps its outpost by the door, as if assigned by a captain you never met. The room dims to the color of baked apples. You set your hand over the ember bed and count heartbeats while your palm learns the shape of warmth. You do not cross the air before the unsat place without making it a gift. Breath is the currency, and you pay in exact amounts. One for the rung, one for the beaker's rim, one for the little bowl of crumbs that has become a chart of everything you refuse to worry loudly about. Outside, a dog explains the moon to itself. The lane rehearses frost without committing. You lift the lid of the pot just enough to let a thought escape and be replaced. The ladle looks heavier than it is. You put it down before it can begin exaggerating. Ember light finds the knife's back and shines there with the satisfaction of metal allowed to be harmless. You sit and lace your fingers, as if binding the day into a book that will not be read again. Across the room, the chair's legs are cathedral straight. The angle to the door remains the width of your patience. The beaker holds a thin crescent of light on its lip that follows your breath like a tame fish. You imagine footsteps that will not come and give them a kind look anyway. Hopes fed this gently do not grow teeth. A draft slips under the threshold and chooses the honored space first. It consults the crumb bowl, nods to the beaker, lifts the cloth's corner to check for decency, and travels on to the hearth to be improved by heat. You approve of a house that trains wind to behave like a guest. The ember crown brightens and then calms. The new stick settles. Ash resettles. The sound of sleep getting ready to be true. You say because words sometimes want employment. Hold together. To the chair, the door, the hinge, the floor, the pot, the beaker, the small tin of salt. The knife turned harmless side out. You include yourself last because it is good hierarchy. Each thing answers in its language. A creak, a silence, a gleam, a refusal to wobble. The chair says the most by making no sound at all. When the log displays its first honest blue, you pinch it with the tongs and lay it where it will learn orange like a lesson. Blue is midnight's habit. Orange is for houses. The ember crown approves with a soft conspiracy. Heat lifts to your face in polite installments. You accept each without suggesting it hurry. If a saint were to visit, you would ask them to admire this. Not miracle, not trial, attendance. You settle the lid, set the spoon, square the cloth, glance the angle, measure the beaker's inch, count the crumbs you pretend not to count. Each action is a stitch. The hour holds because you keep stitching. When you finally lean back and let the bench explain comfort to your shoulders, the ember glimmer still touches the rung, as if to repeat your lesson to wood. Keep still, keep ready, keep listening, even when the room seems empty of assignments. You bend over the pot as if listening through a hedge, polite enough to hear, polite enough not to ask again. Steam lifts in even ribbons, carrying leek, parsley, and the sleepy sweetness of carrot. The broth plops. You slide the lid half a thumb so the pot can breathe. Heat writes a brief letter on your brow. You let it dry unread. Reminders ride the steam because reminders travel best warmed. You offer them in the order the house believes in. Hinges before hopes, salt before stories. Latch, keep your pleasant click, you murmur. And the latch practices from across the room. Door, breathe in before you breathe out. The draft obeys by visiting the unsat chair first. Floor, forgive boots. Boots, try to deserve it. You stir once around the rim to coax quiet from corners. Potatoes turn like moons. Barley remembers how to be helpful. You lift the ladle, taste, decide the stew knows its own name, and set the spoon aside. You bend lower so your breath can keep the empty seat companionably warm. Wheels, be safe. Grain, be easy. You tell the broth, which answers with a round bubble. News, come on your own feet, not on someone else's panic. Geese, settle arguments in your sleep. The room's arithmetic adds up again. Bowl, spoon, crumb, hush. You wipe the lid sweat with the hem of welcome and smooth the drop back into linen. Across the board, the trencher holds the heel. The knife keeps its harmless back toward the world. The stranger cup waits with patience. The nameless chair does what it always does, faces the door, and refuses unnecessary conclusions. You let a ribbon of talk find it. Angle, stay true, shadow, mind your borders. Listening, keep strangers company without telling their names. The stew tries to boil, and then remembers good behavior. You tip the lid thumb to candle until the surface returns to thoughtful. Fire, you say. No auditions for saints. Fire settles. Ash rearranges into a neat thought. You crumble a grain of salt and pinch it in. It vanishes with a humility people rarely manage. Someone will ask later what you put in the pot today. You will say vegetables and time. The rest your voice lowered near the chair. The draft trained to greet in the right order. The short name you said for luck belongs to the flavor that refuses recipes. You tilt the pot to hear whether the bottom is speaking too loudly. It isn't. Iron keeps counsel. You set 3 bowls along field board, small lakes waiting for weather. You leave the space beside the unsat chair clear, except for beaker, cup, and their faithful island of bread. Your hand passes through the warm rise from stew to chair and back again, a carrier of unspecific kindness. Feet find the threshold without stumbling. Voices keep to the wall root. Elbows respect their fences. Steam bears these ordinances toward wood. Wood files them where it keeps wisdom. Because you are you, you check measures again, 2 fingers from cup to edge, 2 from cup to knife, the heel centered, the beaker's chip turned inward, the chair square, the angle the width of a patient breath. The pot answers with a quiet punctuation mark. You answer with a nod and a half smile. That would be sarcasm if anyone were here to deserve it. You ladle first to the elder's bowl, then to the one who forgets to arrive hungry, then to your own, leaving the ladle for last as a small reward for discretion. When you carry the last spoonful past the honored gap, your tone lowers of its own accord. It says nothing the ear can keep, only the temperature of regard. The steam visits the seat, reads the grain with its fingertips, and becomes ordinary air. You call that a success. The lid settles for evening. The fire holds its coins of ember. You wipe the board in strokes. The reminders you sent with the steam find their places: hinge, latch, floor, shadow, angle, and sit down as relatives. You eat while it happens, amount of approval on your face, and the house eats with you, fed on talk that knew better than to raise its voice. You place the elders first, because time has earned the softest corner. Breadback shifts a thumb to welcome knees that have memorized weather. You warm stones at the hearth and roll them in cloths that smell like washed wool. The stones go to feet that thank you by closing their eyes without ceremony. You draw watchpost nearer for the one who hears better with height, and you steady spindle for the careful hips that prefer a quick seat to a long search. The room approves this order and stops pretending it needed your opinion. You lower your voice to the pitch that makes soup and stories behave. Here, you tell one, guiding her with a palm under her elbow, where the fire explains itself slowly. There you tell another, patting the plank as if it could purr. You set the ladle down where it can be reached without bravery. The lids of bowls lift and release small clouds of vegetable patience. Cloth hems meet laps like obedient rivers. The honored gap keeps its shape beside the nameless chair, and you let it, as a host lets a window be a window. You angle the seat a finger more toward the door because wind has been known to arrive unsure of its welcome. 2 fingers from cup to board, 2 from cup to knife. The heel centered on its little island as if bread too wears age with dignity. You feel the space listening and decide not to interrupt. You offer shawls. Hands that once threshed fields now thresh fringes. Tassels report that they are warm enough. You set the salt box nearer to the eldest, so she may rule it with the fairness everyone recognizes. She nods at you with that brief coronation elders. Grant to anyone who remembers the old shortcuts. You bow back without making a scene. Scenes are for markets. Evenings belong to households. A draft slips under the door and walks straight to the kept seat like a cousin who knows which chair is his. You pretend not to notice and serve bowls away from the wind's manners. The elders eat the way trees drink, soundlessly, with the occasional leaf rustle of approval. When voices rise to point at a memory, you touch the table near the gap, and the voices sit down again. Wind accepts the courtesy, as if it had been invited by name. You fetch the little cups and water them to their honest line. Hands that once hauled buckets now lift sip by sip. Wrists tremble only enough to teach spoons humility. You put the beaker within an elder's reach, and the stranger cup within the chair's sight, which is as much as anyone can do for thirst that does not always wear a face. You watch nothing, and therefore see everything you need. Someone tries to thank you, and you let the gratitude go to the ladle. Tools enjoy applause. People get confused by it. You adjust a stool's shadow so it will not startle tired eyes. You push the kindling basket a palm farther from feet that do not deserve splinters. You turn gentle edge so its harmless back continues its quiet sermon. Your hands learn again that care is less a task than a temperature. Stories begin their circles. Lambing, weather. The year frost took bread's courage. The night the wheel drank the river and nobody minded because everyone was too busy being astonished. You keep them from crossing the gap by looking, not shushing. Elders have learned the art of speaking to walls. You only remind the walls which way to carry the sound. Wind listens like a well-brought-up child, which is more than can be said for some children at certain hours. When the pot's voice drops to the register, that means enough. You stop asking it for favors. You sweep crumbs toward the trencher near the kept seat and stop before you erase a constellation an elder's thumb has been tracing without knowing. Fingers finish their map and rest. You refill what asks and ignore what pretends to ask. The evening likes a steward who can tell the difference. You think, not loudly, how age and weather are colleagues, both happier when seated, and both inclined to wander through a door if the angle is wrong. So you keep the angle right. You straighten the cloth where a wrinkle could trip a glance. You set your breath in the air between beaker and chair, and leave it there, a coin of warmth for whoever spends it. The latch answers with a small contented click from across the room. When lids grow heavy, you reverse the ceremony with care. Watchpost returns to its corner. Spindle resumes its duty near the skein. Breadback keeps an imprint of a shoulder that has earned every comfort. You walk the elders to the threshold step named patience and let them rest on it an extra heartbeat, because doors, too, like to be crossed without haste. Night takes them home one by one, proud of its gentleness for once. You look back at the room you have measured with shawls and bowls and angle, and you see that you have seated wind as carefully as kin. The chair holds the door within its gaze. The gap holds the evening without complaining. The crumbs hold a small sky that will be swept only when light returns. You say nothing. You have already said everything by where you put each hand. You stay after the room has excused itself, sleeves rolled, cloth in hand, crumbs discussing among themselves the merits of being bred a second time. Fieldboard wears the day, a salt snow here, a shine there where elbows leaned. Near the beaker and its exact horizon, small brown islands wait for their map. You decide to be cartographer for a minute no one will own. With a finger dampened on the tongue, you herd the crumbs into a line, and then into curves that remember how letters walk. First you draw nothing important, a loop that could belong to anybody, a bar that chooses not to commit. The chair keeps its angle to the door and pretends to read. You are not sentimental, obviously. You are merely testing the broomless range of the alphabet. The crumbs accept a new arrangement with the patience of grain. You trace one initial, then another, not grand, not deep, just enough shape to give your thinking somewhere to set down its basket. You keep the letters close to the cup, so the thick lip can mind them the way a parent minds a child it pretends is not its favorite. Breath warms the air above. The crumbs behave. You do not say the names. Spoken, they would rattle the hinge and confuse the latch into making announcements. Written in edible dust, they agree to be provisional. A line stands for a neighbor who has forgotten how to stop before the door and say, "Are you at table?" A curve stands for the cousin who will arrive in a story before he arrives in shoes. Between them, you leave a small lane of clean board so silence can pass. You add the tilt of a third letter. You have not earned the right to finish and then stop, because enough is a craft. Your finger shows a grainy shine. You wipe it on your apron, and the apron learns another discreet secret. The beaker's rim keeps its faint gloss like a coin. The cloth you hold asks, without speaking, to be allowed to do its work. Not yet, you tell it, and it approves of your improved manners. Draft moves under the door and finds the little script first, as draft should. It noses the crumbs and learns to pronounce them without saying them. The chair's front rung tastes one fleck and decides to remember it longer than is reasonable. Wood keeps recipes for feelings. This is common knowledge and rarely confessed. You shift the trencher a thumb to square it with the edge, a geometry that reassures the eye while your mind makes untidy arrangements. The knife stays turned with its harmless back outward, because even memory deserves to be approached without a sharp tongue. You lean your wrist on the board and listen to the letters, thinking themselves fainter. They are already more suggestion than sign. A small sarcasm visits. You, who lecture elbows on borders, are teaching crumbs how to spell. The room hears the joke and does not laugh, which is polite. You breathe once over the letters, not to blur them, simply to lend them the temperature of being noticed. Your breath arrives, stays the length of a vow that is not binding, and goes on to the hearth to rest. You gather the cloth hem of welcome doubling as hand of goodbye, and lay it over the writing, as if putting a shawl on a thought. Then you draw it back in one slow sweep, quiet as a cat leaving a shelf. The crumbs fold into the weave and vanish to housekeeping. Where they were, the board shows only its old knifework constellations and the patient river of grain. Your letters exist now where rooms keep such things, in the varnish of attention. To be thorough, you pass your palm flat over the place, not scrubbing, just explaining smoothness back to wood. No letter remains except inside you, which is the correct archive for names that do not belong at table tonight. You tilt the cup so the chip looks inward, a small kindness repeated. You leave the beaker at half and the heel centered, because ritual believes in continuity more than conclusions. You step back and measure with the eye that has been trained by furniture. 2 fingers from cup to edge, 2 from cup to knife. Angle of chair the width of patience. Listening clear, shadow obedient. The space feels seen and innocent, which takes more work than anyone admits. You set one breath into its middle the size of a coin again, because that currency has served, and declare the ledger balanced without moving your mouth. At last, the cloth may show off. You wipe the length of the board in long, unbroken strokes, left to right, right to left, as if reading the day in 2 directions, and finding it legible both ways. Crumbs retire to the bowl for birds. Letters retire to wood. Longing retires to its respectable corner, where it keeps a stool, and never asks for a cushion. The chair listens. The door minds its seam of light, and your hand hangs the cloth by the peg with the satisfied weight of work finished correctly and almost invisibly. You keep the chair within sight as the lamps grow thoughtful, because guardianship is easier when the thing guarded never moves. A twist of wick becomes a bead of patient fire. You pinch its pride until it remembers to be useful rather than dramatic. Shadows take their positions like choir boys, each in the familiar mischief of his place. The floor remembers to creak only when spoken to. You do not speak. The door is barred to the notch that admits humility but denies surprise. Latch, pleasant click. Bar, sensible weight. You lay your palm on each, as if naming them by touch. The seam of air at the sill practices discretion and brings in the approved portion of night. Damp wool, hedge breath, a faraway iron smell that might be a star thinking of frost. The chair faces all that and refuses to flinch, which is the chief qualification for its office. You sit on breadback with the careful gravity of someone who will not be leaving soon. Your knees file a quiet complaint, and then, having been heard, behave. On fieldboard, the beaker keeps its small horizon. The stranger cup minds the thick lip that teaches even thirst to respect edges. The trencher holds the modest heel, turned inward like a story that knows when to stop. Listening, the gap beside the chair rests as if it had just finished something strenuous. You acknowledge it with a breath placed in the middle. It keeps the breath and does not say thank you, which is perfect manners. A coal gives the hearth a red eye and then closes it. You feather ash over embers until the bed glows like the memory of heat rather than heat itself. The room sighs its approval. Fire has learned to be a companion rather than a guest. The poker returns to its hook without attempting philosophy. You count heartbeats to the soft pulse under the gray, not to measure time, only to keep company with it. Outside, geese remember they meant to be quiet. A late cart mutters repentances to its axles. The tower tries one cautious note and decides against conversation. Your house hears all of it and places each sound where it cannot do harm. The chair does nothing, which is how it does everything. You feel watched by your own sense of duty and return the favor. You stand once and make the small patrol. Latch, bar, hinge, sill, spoon, knife turn gentle, back, salt, beaker, cup, heel. Chair angled exactly the width of patience, listening clear of elbows and ambitions. You touch nothing except the cloth's hem, which enjoys being stroked for no reason. When you sit again, the bench receives you as if finishing a sentence you both began at noon, between wake and not yet sleep. Thoughts line up like school children who prefer not to be chosen. You let them file past. Safe wheels, easy grain, names you did not write in crumbs because you are finally wiser than your finger. You assign each thought a stool it can occupy until morning. None gets the chair. Wind may sit there if it arrives with manners. Memory may stand by the door and be tall without speaking. The candle shortens by the width of one sensible argument. You turn the cup so its chip looks inward. You turn the knife so it keeps looking harmless. You turn your mind away from the cupboard that will not be fuller for being worried at night. You allow yourself one sarcasm night is a very diligent inspector of hinges. And then you apologize to the hinge by listening until it feels admired. A draft tests the seam and bows to the chair first, as rehearsed. The beaker's lip fogs, clears breath, practicing being weather. You raise your own breath to match it, long in, even out, until the room's chest and yours agree on speed. The ember bed glows a little harder, as if heat enjoys synchronized breathing. You pretend not to notice you have just been soothed by your own housekeeping. When the mouse in the loft moves its pebble from one conviction to another, you do not interfere. When a board considers telling you it is tired, you let it keep that secret. When your eyelids grow heavy, you lift them again for the brief ceremony of a sweep with your gaze. Door, hinge, bar, chair, beaker, heel, listening. Nothing has misbehaved. You reward the house with stillness. At last you shift from watch to near watch, not sleeping, not performing the trick of wakefulness for the benefit of furniture. You allow your head to tip the width of a whisper. The chair maintains its post. The space beside it keeps your small coin of warmth in trust. If anything arrives, dust, walking in the shape of a story, wind in a tidy cloak, a traveler too tired to own his name, your arrangements are already the greeting. This is the victory you prefer. Nothing happening, exactly as planned. Attended to by wood, breath, and the particular courage of people who honor a seat that watches nothing and therefore sees everything. You keep the chair within sight as the lamps grow thoughtful. A twist of wick becomes a small, patient flame. You pinch its pride until it remembers to be useful. Shadows take their posts like boys who know the hymn by heart. The bar drops to its notch, humble, certain. The latch gives the pleasant click you taught it. Wind sends in the approved portion of night. Damp wool, hedge breath, a far iron idea of frost. The chair faces all that and refuses to flinch, which is the whole job. You sit on breadback with the careful gravity of someone who will not be leaving soon. Field board holds the beaker at half. The stranger cup with its thick forgiving lip. The trencher with its modest heel turned inward. Listening, the kept space beside the chair rests as if it has just finished something difficult. You set one coin of breath into its middle. It keeps the coin and does not say thank you, which is perfect manners. Embers settle like red buttons under gray. You feather ash over them until warmth becomes memory rather than argument. The room approves and lowers its shoulders. Outside, a cart mutters to its axles. Geese remember quiet. The tower tries one note and prefers silence. You make the small patrol. Latch, bar, sill. Spoon, salt. Knife turned harmless. Beaker, cup, heel. Angle of chair exactly the width of patience. Between wake and not yet sleep, thoughts line up like school children hoping not to be chosen. You let them pass. Safe wheels, easy grain. Names you did not dare write in crumbs. Weather with no sharp edges. Wind may sit in the unsat place if it arrives with manners. Memory may stand by the door and be tall without speaking. You turn the cup so its chip looks inward. You apologize to the hinge for every sarcastic thought by listening until it feels admired. Draft tests the seam and bows to the chair first, as rehearsed. The beaker's lip fogs, clears, clears. Your own breath joins the rhythm until the ember bed glows a little brighter, pleased by synchronized patience. When your eyelids grow heavy, you sweep once with your gaze door, bar, chair, beaker, heel, listening. Nothing has misbehaved. You reward the house and yourself with stillness. The chair keeps watch by doing nothing. You match it, and the night agrees to pass through without catching on a single nail. You fetch the extra trencher from the shelf where readiness sleeps. The wood is ordinary, which is the correct type for ceremony. You wipe it with the hem of welcome, then turn it upside down before the kept seat round shield against dust, hunger, and the unhelpful impulse to expect. The soft thud says enough. Beside it, the beaker holds its horizon. The heel faces inward. The stranger cup waits with its thick lip, courtesy and caution. You angle the chair a finger toward the door, because even a shield wants a direction. The knife lies harmless back outward. The salt box sits within easy reach of no one. You breathe into the small square of air between trencher and seat, teaching it the temperature of attention. Then you step away, as one does after laying a blanket over a sleeper who will not wake. People ask why plates are turned. You do not answer with stories about saints or frost. You say the truth made properly dull. It keeps the place decent when no mouth is ready for it. A downturned plate does not call out. It agrees to wait. If a traveler arrives, you write it with 2 fingers. A quiet reversal that feels like saying yes without making a fuss. If no traveler comes, the plate has still worked hard by protecting a promise from flies and hope from boasting. Through the afternoon you pass without looking, as if you were not looking. The circle remains, moon of refusal turned into consent. Draft tastes its rim and behaves better. Children learn to steer their elbows by it. The cloth under it stays uncrumbed, a neat island in a sea of useful mess. You approve of decency that shows itself by leaving no mark. Near twilight, a cousin almost sets a cup upon it and stops, because the village has taught even hurry to notice shape. You rescue nothing. His hand rescues itself. Later, you lift the trencher, wipe the ring of air from the cloth, and turn it right side up to let wood breathe. The place underneath is cool and calm, as if absence had been sitting there politely all along. You set the trencher back upside down for the night, a lid laid over wanting. The beaker glimmers, the heel keeps counsel. The chair continues its interview at the door. Nothing has changed. Everything has been cared for. You light the room with talk that knows how not to travel. Bowls have been cleared. Spoons rest like small moons. The cloth lies square. You begin a tale that circles the hearth the way moths circle lamp, never brushing the gap beside the chair. The story is about a winter when flour pretended to be snow and the miller married patience. It is also about nothing, which is why everyone listens. Voices learn the wall route. The words leave your mouth, follow the boards, curve behind breadback, hop to watchpost, and return along the sill, obedient as trained geese. No sentence crosses listening. When laughter rises, you lay your palm flat on fieldboard, and laughter sits. The door breathes in approval. The beaker keeps its mild glimmer. The heel holds steady counsel. The stranger cup imagines hands and is content to imagine. A child asks whether the hero walked in by the door. Of course, you say, and nod toward the angle of the chair. Even heroes remember manners. The child grins into his sleeve, where grins can ripen without spilling. Someone adds a detail about frost that learned to chew slowly. Someone else claims a rooster negotiated with dawn. Exaggeration tires quickly at this volume and chooses to be reasonable. You pass the salt box like punctuation. A pause here, a comma there. The story keeps its small round path. When it edges toward the gap, you choose a different detail, as one steers a cart around a puddle that wants to be a lake. You speak one line toward the unsat seat, barely language, more temperature. Safe wheels, easy grain, doors without argument. Then you return to the rooster's diplomacy. Outside, the lane tucks in its noises. Inside, the tail folds into bread crusts and the clean ring of a cup meeting wood. By the time you reach the part where nothing happens most beautifully, everyone is ready for nothing. The ending is not an ending. It is a breath you set in the air and leave there. Silence takes its turn and performs well. You rise and wipe the board in long strokes, not erasing the story so much as smoothing it into the grain. The gap remains clear. The chair faces the door. You thank the room for listening by letting it keep what it heard without keeping score. Everyone nods, content to be unimportant together tonight. Truly, you spread bedding near the hearth, because sleep likes to learn warmth by example. The straw tick releases its faint summer whisper. The linen sheet remembers wash-day wind. The wool blanket rehearses its old argument and yields. You place your palette so that, without turning your head, you can see the chair angled toward the door, sentry made of patience and rungs. The beaker's rim keeps a soft light. The trencher's heel sits in obedient shadow. The stranger cup rests at its exact horizon. You smooth the cloth's hem as if it were a brow. Ash cloaks the embers into a silver that does not brag. The hinge practices silence. Draft visits the kept space first and proves it still knows the way. You lie down and listen to the room settling back into itself. You make the inventory that eases ribs. Latch, bar, sill, spoon, salt, knife turned harmless. Beaker, cup, heel, chair, angle, listening. For the last time today, you add a coin of breath to the middle of the saved air. It is accepted and filed. Your eyes close and open, because houses prefer to be admired one more time. You oblige with a nod that is mostly eyelids. Sleep arrives in practical clothing. It does not knock. It understands the angle of the chair means entry is arranged. Your hearing expands before it reduces. Geese far off, a fox negotiating hedges, a cart thinking about tomorrow. Inside, the tick finds your bones. The blanket counts your breaths. The straw retells the meadow slowly. You feel the floor's old river under the boards and let it carry what you forgot to set down. If someone came now, wood would notice first. The chair would not move. The room would. The beaker would lift a thin gleam. The cup would be already half ready. The plate would become a plate. Your breath would change key but not speed. Nothing dramatic, nothing wasted. The custom is its own guardian. You turn once more. Give the unsat seat a smile only sleep understands, and let the house take the watch. Moonlight finds the rung and stays there, the precise weight of a promise kept without ceremony. You are asleep before you can admire your own trust, which is as it should be. The night folds over you like linen, cool, exact, forgiven. The chair listens, and the door remembers to breathe. Moonlight enters like a clerk who keeps perfect records and never signs his name. It sifts along the sill, counts the pegs that hold the trestles, and makes a careful ledger on field board. Beaker, half cup, steady. Heel, present, knife, harmless, cloth, square. It pauses on the chair's top rail and writes a note only wood can read, then lays a narrow coin of light across the front rung. You sleep and do not know you are being audited by tenderness. The house writes too. The hinge drafts a sentence of restraint. The hearth jots a footnote in gray. The floor signs the margins with two honest creaks. Outside, hedges whisper their usual gossip to geese, and geese decide to keep it until morning. Wind, having been seated earlier with courtesy, behaves like a relative who found the best chair and learned humility. Moonlight does not bless. It confirms nothing, hears everything, and leaves matters untroubled. It visits listening and finds that the saved air holds one coin of warmth. It does not spend it. It visits the trencher and discovers usefulness asleep. It checks the door and discovers it breathing in the correct rhythm. Being satisfied, it moves on 2 finger widths and becomes merely silver. Some nights, memory wakes to stretch its legs. Tonight, it chooses to keep company with fences instead. Your breath continues its work without announcing itself. The chair keeps its angle to the door with the authority of something that has never won a fight and never needed to. If a saint were the type to wander, this would be a good hour. If a thief were the type to think, this would be their lesson. Toward cockcrow, the ledger closes itself. The coin of light on the rung fades to rumor. The beaker trades its glimmer for honest glass. The cloth becomes a cloth again. In your sleep you turn and offer the room your back as trust. The house accepts. What needed hearing was heard. What needed deciding decides itself by not changing at all. Dawn, undecided, waits outside like a messenger. The moon takes its leave, and no one is offended. The chair completes its shift. In another home, the custom might be different. Here, absence is hosted until it becomes presence of a gentler sort. Morning will discover everything where you left it, improved only by having been quietly seen. Before dawn remembers its job, the house finishes its listening. You lie easy on the tick, a careful weight distributed to make no point sore. The embers wear a crown of gray. Beneath, warmth keeps a small steady thought. The chair holds the door inside its patient gaze. The beaker is now plain glass. The cup is a cup again. The heel, a quiet hill. Everything returns to its simplest name and remains generous. You take one long breath that belongs to no hour and let it go through the kept space beside the chair. The breath pauses there in the way a bird pauses on a fence post to make balance look effortless. It leaves nothing behind but the fact of having been gentle. Listening, satisfied, goes back to being air. The bar rests. The latch keeps its single syllable in reserve. Somewhere under the hedge, a fox completes a sentence about chickens and ethics. The geese decide to argue later. The well rope stretches and sighs, dreaming of buckets. The tower, uncertain, practices a note into its sleeve. You do not move. You let the night put away its tools. Frost folded into the ditch, stars sorted by brightness, shadows stacked like bowls. None of it requires your comment. You think the smallest village blessing, the one too short to say aloud, let today come in on soft feet. You send it without words toward the seam of the door and watch nothing change for the better, which is how such blessings announce success. The chair continues its exemplary career of not interfering. The floor keeps your secret that you are awake in the most comfortable way by forgetting to notice. When the sky finally decides to dilute, it does so by degrees you would miss if you blinked. You do not blink. The first light is colorless as clean water. It finds the rung, the rail, the rim, and gives back nothing fancy. You lift your head the width of a coin and return it to the pillow. You have kept the watch you set for yourself, to be present without being busy. Dawn will ring its bell and invent errands. For this more truthful minute, your only task is to let the room complete its thought. It completes it well. The house, the chair, the saved place. And you arrive at morning already friends with it. Now, you let the room keep speaking in its smallest language. Soft draft, cooling ash, wood that remembers hands. The chair stays angled to the door, patient as a field waiting for light. You are not asked for decisions. You are not asked for stories. The kept space beside the seat holds a calm the size of a palm, and you match its scale without effort. Your breath chooses the gentlest distance between in and out, and then repeats it, agreeable as a path worn by kind feet. The house has become the quiet version of a procession. Beaker, cup, heel, cloth, knife turned harmless, salt, latch, bar, sill, floor, bench, stool. Each thing stands where it knows how to be useful and does not compete. The bird edits the margin. The day peeks in to see if it's welcome. Your stillness says yes. You lie as a loaf rests after baking, finished, modest, content to cool. The tasks you postponed lose their question marks and turn into ordinary punctuation. The worries that like to practice at night wander off to check the hedges, where they will forget why they came. The breath you send toward the unsat place returns to you as simple comfort, as if air had learned to pat a shoulder. There is nowhere else to go, and nothing else to prove. The custom you kept one chair turned to greet whoever travels lightest has kept you as well. It has kept the hour, the room, the village measure of courtesy. Morning will arrive carrying spoons and errands, but it will put them down softly because you have taught it how. You let your eyes close the way a good door closes. On the first try, with a friendly click, sure of being opened again when the time is right. We hope this glimpse into old customs has been a calm and pleasant one. If it made you curious for more, you can like, share, or leave a kind comment. And if you wish, subscribe to be here for the next unhurried tradition we explore together. End of script. Sweet dreams.